Chapter 886. The autumn in the depths of the wilderness was colder, but the man standing among the mountains did not seem to feel the cold. His leather clothes were leaking, revealing his strong body. His body seemed to contain an infinite amount of power. With a casual wave of his hand, he could destroy a mountain and break a city. However, at this moment, he was like a stone statue, not daring to move. It was not because of this, but because there was a very small carriage on his back. There was a petite girl sitting on the carriage, and he was afraid that she would be uncomfortable from the jolting. He was the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, Tang. The girl in the sedan looked only 12 or 13 years old, and she was holding her chin in boredom. She was his teacher, the current Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. Of course, she was also the third sister of the back mountain of the academy. Her name was Yu Lian. After the battle with the Abbey Dean in Chang'an, Yu Lian jumped into the blue sky and then fell into the snow street. Even though her devil's kung fu had reached the sublime state, she was still badly injured. Her ankles, which were as hard as diamonds, were all broken into pieces. It was not easy for her to get out of the wheelchair, but it was still inconvenient for her to walk. Therefore, after coming to the wilderness, she sat in the sedan and let Tang carry her around. She looked at the vast wilderness in front of the majestic Tianqi Mountain and the faintly discernible gorge. She said, "I'm disappointed that you can't even do such a simple thing well." The cold wind blew, and her twin ponytails swayed gently behind her, looking very cute. Her eyes and brows were clear and cute, but she was expressionless and had the bearing of a grandmaster, looking very scary. Tang said, "The news that the Golden Tribe Royal Court is going to attack Helan City in the deep winter has spread throughout the wilderness. Even if the tribes want to help, there are still tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the left camp in the East Wilderness. It's difficult to go there." Yu Lian said, "We can go there naturally if we kill all the cavalrymen of the barbarians." Tang did not understand and asked, "How?" Yu Lian said in a very normal tone, "Your injuries have healed. With your current cultivation, is it difficult for you to kill 200 barbarians in a day?" Tang thought for a while and said, "It should not be difficult." Yu Lian said, "If you kill 200 in a day, you can kill 20,000 in 100 days. Even if there are 40,000 cavalrymen of the left camp, they will be destroyed by you." Tang was speechless. He thought, how could they just stop there and let you kill them? Moreover, why would they arrange 200 cavalrymen for you to kill every day? What if 10,000 cavalrymen attacked at the same time? Ultimately, combat wasn't a simple math problem. It had been many years since Zhang Xian had last seen his teacher, and his current way of thinking was truly incomprehensible. "It is not difficult to understand," Yu Lian said. "The useless Longqing is not in the eastern wilderness, so the left tent palace has lost its backbone. If you follow my instructions and kill for a few days, you will know that those barbarian cavalrymen are worse than useless people." Tang said, "It is too late." Yu Lian said, "Left." Of the Tang said, "Tang, it." After a moment of silence, Tang asked, "Then why did you come to the wilderness instead of Peach Mountain?" Yu Lian seemed to be afraid of the cold. She hugged her knees and said, "I haven't recovered yet. What's the point of going to Peach Mountain? Not of the divine. Of the mountain, our rise. Of the camp. Not. It will definitely be very lively. Who of sacred? Of camp. Mountain. Of the mountain. Wilderness. Divine of divine of great sea. Of the divine. And the divine of. The successor of the great divine priest of the South Sea? That's right. I think Lu Bai should have already arrived. Why is he going to the right to light? Because she is leaving at the right to light. Is he reluctant to let her go? Lu Bai is brave. He is invincible in the world. Who doesn't feel lonely? When he is lonely, he will think about things he shouldn't. Why is Lu Bai invincible? Because he lent the Taoist sword to Cao Xiaoshu. My senior brother left some information in Cao Xiaoshu's ocean of consciousness. It is from Chong and the Academy's view of the human world. Actually, I don't understand why Lu Bai agreed to lend me the sword. In the wilderness, Tang was a fierce man. But now, with his back to Yulian, he was silent and honest. He played the role of a disciple and asked questions. Yulian said, because he admires Cao Xiaoshu. He didn't kill him last time and he won't kill him this time. He continued, maybe it is not because he admires Cao Xiaoshu. Yulian said, don't forget that he is a swordsman. Tang understood what she meant. A swordsman was upright. If Lu Bai didn't dare to kill Cao Xiaoshu because of the Tang Empire's power or the Academy's reputation, how could he become the most powerful sage of sword in the world? Tang asked, can Lu Bai defeat the drunkard? Yulian said, the drunkard is no longer in Lu's eyes. Of course, the drunkard will die. Even if he doesn't die this time, he will die in the hands of the Academy. After a moment of silence, Tang asked, is this the change you want to see? Yulian waved her soft hands and said casually, actually, I don't know what will happen either. Tang, who was as calm as a mountain, suddenly trembled when he heard this. Yulian knew what he was worried about. She said, although I asked everyone to wait for the change I mentioned, I really didn't make any arrangements. How can a man's plan be better than God's plan? Tang's expression became solemn. His most beloved sister should be fighting for that damned fatty on Peach Mountain. If everything was going according to God's plan, how could she succeed and leave? Do you mean that Lu Bai might not make a move? Jun Mo and I both think he will, but we don't know when he will do it. Of course, as long as he does, the one in the Divine Hall of Light will be in trouble. You can say that this is the change. Even the headmaster of Academy can't defeat her, let alone Lu Bai. Lu Bai himself should know that he can't defeat her, but he still took out his sword. This means that he thinks the Academy's idea is interesting, and he wants to participate in such an interesting thing. What's interesting? Yulian said. We told him that as long as he takes out his sword, she will be in trouble. If Haotian finds it troublesome, it's probably not very interesting for someone like Lu Bai. Tang frowned and asked, what kind of trouble? Yulian said, even if she is Haotian, she will have to pay a price to suppress the most powerful person in the world. This means that she will be weak, worried, and sentimental. Tang was puzzled and said, I don't understand. As long as she starts to worry and becomes sentimental, Ning Ke might be able to defeat her. Yulian smiled and said, earlier I said that it doesn't matter who goes to Peach Mountain today. This does not include youngest brother. He is meaningful, and he is on Peach Mountain now. Tang still couldn't understand. Even the headmaster of Academy couldn't defeat her. How could Ning Ke? This is the second chapter. The plot is here. There are only 2,000 words. I will try to finish the next chapter as soon as possible. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 887. No one came to the front yard of Peach Mountain. The three masters from the Academy did not come. Chen Pippi stood on the altar and looked in the direction of where he came from. He suddenly smiled and said to Tang Xiaotang, it seems that senior brothers and sisters are delayed. Why don't you go first? I can't. Tang Xiaotang also smiled and turned to look at the blood-red divine sedan of judgment. Her smile faded and she became very serious. She said, what are you waiting for? No one understood why she chose to challenge the great divine priest of judgment. Only Yi Hongyu, Tang Xiaotang, and Ning Ke, who had been hiding in the crowd, knew that it was a promise made years ago in the wilderness. At that time, Ning Ke, Mo Shanshan, and Yi Hongyu came out of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine along the ropeway and found a white dog in the basket. Then they met Tang Xiaotang, who was looking for the dog. Later on, the four of them walked through the stone gorge created by the ancestors of the Devil's Doctrine and said many harsh words. But in the end, they all lost to Ning Ke, the shame of the academy. Ning Ke looked at Tang Xiaotang, who was covered in blood and holding the iron cudgel. He suddenly remembered when he met her years ago. Before he saw her, he heard her shout in the fog, "Who dares to touch my dog?" "Today, at the right to light," she said, "who dares to touch my man?" It seemed that Chun Pippi was as important to her as the little white wolf. Thinking of this, he could not help but laugh. The servants beside him felt strange. They thought, "How can you be in such a good mood at a time like this?" Ning Ke was actually not in a good mood. He thought of Shanshan far away in the great river and Yi Hongyu in the divine sedan. He thought of the time when they were young. Years had passed and they were still young, but they were no longer the young people they used to be. Yi Hongyu looked at Tang Xiaotang outside the sedan and suddenly smiled. She did not say any nonsense. Her natal Taoist sword buzzed as if it was about to fly out of its sheath. Almost at the same time, the sword of the deacon of the Divine Hall of Judgment beside the sedan flew out. Dozens of flying swords surrounded Tang Xiaotang. The iron cudgel in Tang Xiaotang's hand was like a gust of wind. It was so fast that even the naked eye could not follow it. The flying swords fell to the ground one by one. A series of crisp collisions rang out in front of the altar, like a cheerful piece of music. Yi Hongyu's natal Taoist sword was the last to reach the altar and stabbed at Tang Xiaotang's face. Tang Xiaotang let out a clear shout and quickly withdrew her iron rod to block the sword in front of her. This was not a rod smashing a sword, but a sword cutting a rod. The Taoist sword was not damaged, but the iron rod trembled violently. Tang Xiaotang's face was pale, and blood was dripping from the corner of her mouth. She had already been seriously injured. Now that Yi Hongyu's natal Taoist sword was approaching her, her injuries were about to explode. But she was fearless. Looking at the Taoist sword that was circling in the air, she gripped the iron rod tightly again. Unexpectedly, the Tao sword did not descend. Yi Hongyu's cold voice sounded from the divine chariot, "If you can break out of my confinement, come and fight me again." Only now did Tang Xiaotang realize that the dozens of Tao swords that she had struck to the ground earlier were all pointing downwards, piercing into the hard limestone floor. It looked like a messy fence. An extremely powerful array intent was emanating from these sword branches. It was the ultimate array of the West Hill Divine Hall of Judgment, the confinement. How could she get out of the confinement? Tang Xiaotang did not expect Yi Hongyu's Taoism to have reached such a state. But she knew that Yi Hongyu was actually going easy on her by trapping her in the confinement. But she was not happy. She looked at Yi Hongyu in the divine chariot through the fence of swords and shouted, "I want a real fight." Yi Hongyu ignored her. There were many people who were dissatisfied with this scene. For example, some of the old divine priests in the West Hill Divine Halls felt that the great divine priest of judgment was too merciful. Someone else was even more displeased than Tang Xiaotang. Yi Hongyu had just killed her uncle and injured her uncle, but now she was being merciful to the demoness of the Devil's Doctrine. Xiaoyu, the girl from the South Sea, looked at the divine hall of judgment and scolded angrily, "I did not expect the great divine priest of judgment to be acquainted with the demoness of the Devil's Doctrine. If you can't bear to kill her, I will." As soon as she finished speaking, a slender Taoist sword rose from behind her and circled around the front yard of Peach Mountain. Then it pierced through the fence of swords and stabbed at Tang Xiaotang. She was indeed a genius girl who had reached the knowing destiny state at the age of 17. It looked like a simple sword, but it was extremely powerful. What was more frightening was that her sword actually pierced through the fence of swords. Yi Hongyu was slightly stunned. She did not expect that this person could see through the confinement. It seemed that when the great divine priest of the South Sea left Peach Mountain, he not only took some classics from the Divine Hall of Light, but also the Divine Hall of Judgment. Tang Xiaotang's spirit and willpower were all focused on Yi Hongyu in the divine chariot. She did not expect that the girl from the South Sea would suddenly attack her. In danger, she hurriedly raised her rod to block the attack. With a crisp sound, her iron rod flew out of her hand and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Xiao Yu, the girl from the South Sea, quickly pinched her sword. The flying sword circled around and stabbed at Tang Xiaotang again. It seemed that no one could save her now. Chen Pipi's face was pale. His fat body trembled violently as if he was about to fall. A flash of sword light flashed by. Xiao Yu, the girl from the South Sea, let out a muffled groan. Blood seeped from the corner of her mouth. She struggled to withdraw her natal sword. Before anyone could react, the bright sword light fell from the sky and brushed past the girl's cheek. She struggled to raise her sword to block it, but it was impossible for her to completely block it. A bloody sword scar appeared on the girl's face. The bright sword light flew back to the divine chariot. Yi Hongyu's cold voice came from the divine chariot again. This is a battle between me and her. Who do you think you are? How dare you interfere? Seeing that Tang Xiaotang was covered in blood but was not in danger, Chen Pipi finally heaved a sigh of relief. Then he relaxed and sat down on the white stone altar. He looked at the divine chariot of judgment and rubbed his chest. He said, "Couldn't you have done it earlier? Why did you have to scare me like this?" In the divine chariot, Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. She thought that it was still that fat man. Chen Pipi was grateful, but he was complaining. Yi Hongyu had wanted to kill Chen Pipi for many years, but when it came down to it, she even wanted to save his woman. The hatred of childhood and the hatred of youth would probably turn into something beautiful and interesting when one grew up. Ning Ke did not wait for the arrival of his 3 senior brothers and sisters like the West Hill Divine Palace. Because in the Academy's plan, they had nothing to do with it. He was waiting for changes. When eldest brother reviewed the plan made by Ning Ke and fourth brother, he raised a question about the most crucial part of it. Ning Ke could not answer it because he did not know how to wait for that opportunity. At that time, Yu Lian said that opportunities could not be created, and everything was changing. When Lu Bai's sword broke through the clear light and pointed at the divine hall of light, he thought it was the change that his senior sister had mentioned. When the successor of the great divine priest of South Sea came to the front yard of Peach Mountain and began to fight with the West Hill Divine Palace, he thought it was the change. When Tang Xiaotang broke through 3 tests and rushed to the altar, he thought it might be the change. But in fact, nothing changed. The opportunity he was waiting for never came. He could not wait any longer. When Chen Pipi was about to be burned to death by Haotian's divine flame, he was ready to act. When the girl from the South Sea attacked Tang Xiaotang, he was also ready to act. He knew that Chen Pipi's words were not meant for Yi Hongyu, but for himself. But she was still on Peach Mountain in the Divine Hall of Light. If he did not wait for the change that Yu Lian mentioned, then he would never be able to defeat her. But what was the change? Sang Sang stood in front of the Divine Hall of Light, expressionless. She was no longer looking at Chang'an or the past. She was looking at her own territory and the present. The front yard of Peach Mountain was filled with battles of life and death. Many beautiful and ugly things were hidden in it. But in her eyes, it was all a farce, for it had no value other than entertainment. For tens of thousands of years, except for the actions of a few people like the headmaster, in Haotian's eyes, all the major events in the world were trivial and meaningless, whether it was war or disaster, not to mention the common things like birth, old age, sickness, and death. Just like in the eyes of humans, there was no sorrow or joy of ants. She did not care that the South Sea people appeared on Peach Mountain because they were her most devout believers. She had seen the war between believers for power countless times in the Divine Kingdom. It was nothing new. She also did not care about Lu Bai's sword. She was Haotian and could calculate everything in the world. She wanted to see if the Academy's plan was out of her calculations. That was more important. After waiting for such a long time, the Academy's plan still did not go beyond her calculations. She began to feel bored. Looking at Chun Pippi on the altar, she began to feel impatient. Even if the right to light could not reopen the gate to the divine kingdom, she had to sever her bond with the human world. Even if she could not sever the strongest bond, she had to sever something else. For her, Chun Pippi's death meant that a thread of her bond with the mortal world could be broken. He was still alive, and Tang Xiaotang, who represented another thread of her bond with the mortal world, was saved by another thread of her bond. This made her feel a little annoyed. She did not want to admit that the annoyance came from the bonds and that the other end of those bonds was tied to her. So she wanted Chun Pippi to die as soon as possible. She thought she was not angry, but she did not know that a storm was brewing deep in her eyes. She returned to the balcony of the divine hall and looked at the cliffs and clouds. She no longer paid attention to the boring things in the front yard. Whatever Haotian felt, the human world responded. The most devout believers in the front yard of Peach Mountain, the divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill, and those who returned from the South Sea were the first to feel the anger from the sky. Whatever Haotian thought, the heaven and earth responded. The autumn wind began to rage on Peach Mountain. The fallen peach blossoms were blown up by the wind and danced in the air. They looked beautiful but also bloody because of the color. I wrote 5,000 words, but there is something wrong with the plot, so it is broken at 3,000. The main problem is the name of the chapter. Severing Bond can only be stopped here. The other two chapters are called Ceaseless Severance and Disorder Resolution. The next 2,000 words need to be named another chapter, so I have to postpone it. It will be finished before 3:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 888. An inexplicable majesty descended from the peak of Peach Mountain and enveloped the entire front yard. People felt a power that did not belong to the human world. In the sacred sedan, the hierarch lord knelt down without hesitation. Yi Hongyu thought for a moment and slowly changed her posture from sitting to kneeling. Zhao Nanhai was about to scold Yi Hongyu when he suddenly felt the power of heaven and earth. His expression changed drastically and he knelt down in awe. Everyone in the divine halls of West Hill knelt down. People from the South Sea knelt down as well. The national master of the Golden Tribe came all the way to the right to light just to see the face of God again. He had already knelt down devoutly. Everyone in the front yard of Peach Mountain knelt down, including the monks of the Buddhism sect. Chun Pippi sat on the white stone altar. He was going to die anyway, so why should he kneel? Tang Xiaotang knew who was on Peach Mountain, so she did not want to kneel. If you are Haotian and I am a disciple of the Enlightenment doctrine, why should I kneel? If you are Sang Sang and I am your friend, why should I kneel? She stubbornly stood there, withstanding the endless pressure. Blood was forced out of her wounds and flowed out. She looked extremely miserable. Her knees made creaking sounds and slowly bent, as if they were about to break. No matter how stubborn she was still a mortal. How could she withstand such a horrifying power of heaven and earth? However, just as she was about to be forced to kneel, she saw Chun Pippi on the altar. She imitated him and sat down on the ground. She smiled at Peach Mountain and thought, "What else can you do to me?" Chun Pippi smiled at her and gave her a thumbs up, praising her quick thinking and his own. However, he did not expect that as the sacrifice of the right to light, he had to bear the most power of heaven and earth. In just a moment, he found that he could no longer sit on the altar. The sky was filled with peach blossoms and the autumn wind was howling. Chun Pippi cursed and sprawled out on the altar. Although his posture was not elegant, he had once again won the battle against Haotian. Ning Ke knelt down quickly, even faster than the servants beside him. He comforted himself as he knelt down. "You have washed my feet many times over the years. What's the big deal about paying you back today?" The wind blew and then the chanting of the right to light. It was still the West Hill scripture of worship to heaven, but it came from the mouths of the priests of the South Sea. Everyone from the South Sea, including Zhao Nanhai, didn't know why they had to start chanting. It was as if a voice was guiding them. Their faces were pale, and their eyes were filled with awe. The divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace, the teachers and students of the Revelation Institute, and the tens of thousands of believers kneeling on the front yard began to chant along with the divine priests of the South Sea. The sacred and solemn chanting gradually rang through the world. The worship to heaven chapter passed down by the divine priests of the South Sea was indeed more exquisite. Compared with the sacrificial ceremony at the beginning, this sacrificial ceremony was much smoother, and Haotian could hear it more clearly. Countless rays of light came from the autumn sun and fell on the white stone altar. Chun Pippi's eyes lit up. He felt very uneasy and wanted to toss and turn, but he found that he couldn't move. When the funeral oration ended, these rays of light would turn into pure Haotian divine flame, and he would be burned into green smoke. No one would know what would happen after that. He saw that in the azure sky, there seemed to be an extra crack. He said curiously, "Look, the sky is about to open." No one heard him, because most of the people in the front yard of Peach Mountain were focused on the sacrificial ceremony. Xiaoyu, the young girl from the South Sea, looked at him with tears in her eyes. Her face was full of sorrow. However, this was the will of Haotian. Even though she was his fiancée, she dared not do anything against the will of Haotian. Tang Xiaotang looked at Chun Pippi and said, "Let me try again." In her eyes, since he was her man, she should do something. She didn't know where the power came from, but she was able to stand up in the midst of the power of heaven and earth. She didn't know how to defeat Haotian, but since it was a battle, she needed a weapon. The iron rod in her hand had been knocked far away. Tang Xiaotang struggled to stand, looking around for a weapon. Suddenly she saw a sword. She didn't know it was Lu Bai's sword, but she thought it was a good one, because the sword was floating in the air in front of the altar, motionless. Before the power of heaven and earth, everyone had knelt down. Even the swords in the confinement sword fence were bowing to the Peach Mountain, as if they were kowtowing. Only the sword remained silent, unwilling to bend. Tang Xiaotang reached out her hand to hold the sword, but found that she couldn't pull it out. She was unwilling to give up. She exerted all the strength in her body, but the sword didn't move an inch, as if it didn't belong to this world. The more she felt the sword was extraordinary, the more she refused to let go. As she exerted more strength, her blood flowed faster. It flowed down her wrist and onto the sword. She had run thousands of miles from Chang'an to the Peach Mountain. She had been fighting non-stop. Her blood was always hot, even boiling. When it fell on the sword, it made a sizzling sound. The sword suddenly moved. The head of the sword trembled slightly, and then slowly rose, aiming at the divine hall of light on the peak of Peach Mountain. Tang Xiaotang's eyes were wide open. She looked at it curiously, not knowing what was going on. Chun Pippi suddenly laughed out loud and said, "Sir Sword Saint, quickly save me." Ning Ke looked at the sword that was slightly raised and remained silent. Yu Lian said nothing had changed, because God's plan was always better than man's plan. So she didn't calculate anything and just followed the will of heaven. Then the change happened. The change he had been waiting for finally happened. Thousands of miles away from Peach Mountain was the South Gene, and the Sword Garret was there. The disciples of the Sword Garret were kneeling in front of the sword-like peak. After Chao Xiaoshu's visit to the Sword Garret, Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword, went to Linkong City. After returning to the Sword Garret, he started his closed-door training. Cultivators often needed to do closed-door training. Lu Bai had been obsessed with swordsmanship all his life, so he had done closed-door training many times. But this time it was different. He had driven all the disciples out of the Sword Garret. Deep in the mountain, the pond water was still cold. Lu Bai sat by the pond and closed his eyes to meditate. An ancient sword was floating above the pond water. He had spent decades cultivating this ancient sword to perfection. Last autumn, the headmaster borrowed it to slay the golden dragon and the immortal general. Since then, no one was qualified to use this sword. He was not qualified either. He sat facing the sword for many days and nights. The shadow of the sword fell on him and became very deep, as if he and the sword were merging into one. The ancient sword suddenly trembled slightly. Lu Bai felt it and opened his eyes to look at the sword and himself. He smiled and said, "The hot blood of a young girl is indeed the best. It can best inspire human courage." The ancient sword whistled up and flew through the cave on the peak of the mountain. The cold pond was cold, and Lu Bai was nowhere to be seen. The sacred words of the West Hill scripture to heaven echoed in front of Peach Mountain. Everyone was kneeling and praying devoutly. Only the sword in front of the altar slowly raised its head. The sword did not lower its head. Instead, it raised its head. It represented the person's attitude towards Peach Mountain, the divine hall of light at the peak, and her in the divine hall of light. The hierarch lord was the one who paid the most attention to this scene. He was furious, but also confused. He could not understand the deep hatred between the sword Garrett and the academy. Lu Yiqing's eyes had been blinded by Ning Ke, and countless disciples of the sword Garrett had died in the hands of the Tangs. Lu Bai could at most remain neutral in this war between Taoism and the academy. How could he dare to provoke the one on Peach Mountain with his sword? Tang Xiaotong's hot blood dripped on the sword and evaporated into a bloody mist, which then dispersed into the flying peach petals. The bloody mist faintly exuded an extremely proud sword intent. The believers and priests who were piously kowtowing and praying were pierced by this sword intent. They subconsciously felt a sharp pain in their throats, which made it difficult for them to speak. Divine priests like Zhao Nanhai, who had a firm Taoist heart and a profound state, were still chanting the scripture to heaven. However, the tens of thousands of believers and deacons could no longer make a sound. The voices in front of Peach Mountain became weaker, less orderly, and more chaotic. The rays of light from the autumn sun also became dimmer. Chun Pippi, who was on the white stone altar, did not know what was going on. He looked at the sky in confusion. The power of heaven and earth covering the front yard of Peach Mountain sensed the change. It was indifferent but also angry. The hierarch lord was trembling. He stood up and stared at the sword angrily. He had already guessed what Lu Bai was going to do. Even though he was shocked by Lu Bai's choice and angry that Lu Bai displeased Haotian, he actually welcomed the situation. Since the 23-year cicada cultivation did not dare to show up, then let me destroy your sword and kill you, the most powerful cultivator in the world, to rebuild the prestige of the divine halls of West Hill. The hierarch lord of West Hill was a powerhouse who had surpassed the 5 states. Now that Haotian had healed him, he was even more powerful than before. But even so, he would not be so confident when facing Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword. Even though Lu Bai had not surpassed the 5 states, it was not because he could not, but because he did not want to. His sword could sweep across thousands of miles. How could it not surpass the threshold that was so high in the eyes of ordinary cultivators? But now, the hierarch lord was confident that he could defeat Lu Bai. He had planned to destroy the academy at the right to light. How could he be afraid of Lu Bai? But where did his confidence come from? It came from the divine hall of light on Peach Mountain, and from the man in the hall. The hierarch's great divine sense that surpassed the 5 states was the Tianqi of Haotian Taoism. The Tianqi was a cultivator's greatest devotion and faith to ask Haotian for power. Now that Haotian was in the human world, the distance between him and Haotian was only the distance between the mountain and the foot of the mountain. The Tianqi did not need to cross the sky, and there would be no more losses. Once the Tianqi was achieved, he would have incredible power. Who could be his opponent? The hierarch stretched out his hands, facing the sky with his palms separated by the giant sedan. A majestic power descended from the divine hall of light on Peach Mountain and came to the front yard of Peach Mountain. This power was so terrifying that it was many times more powerful than the power of heaven and earth before. The hierarch looked at his new, tender palms and smiled. He was the most powerful person under Haotian, Lu Bai, Lin Wu, and even if the headmaster came back to life, they would not be his opponent. At this moment, Lu Bai's sword changed from being extremely quiet to extremely fast. It whistled through the air. The sword hilt scratched Tang Xiaotong's hand. The girl's hot blood on the sword was shaken into countless drops of blood, sprinkling into the sky. The bright but ordinary blade went straight for the hierarch's face in the giant sedan. The hierarch's shout was like thunder. He was going to use the Tianqi to crush the sword. However, he suddenly realized that nothing had changed. He did not feel a trace of the magnificent divine power in his small body. Where was the Tianqi? Didn't he use the Tianqi? Why couldn't he feel the divine power in his body? What was going on? Lu Bai's sword did not enter the giant sedan, nor did it stop in front of the hierarch. It only followed the Academy's request and flew to Peach Mountain with sword style. The sword did not stab the hierarch, who was stunned. This sword came from the human world, but it was already above the human world. There was no one in the human world who was qualified to stain it with blood. Moreover, the person holding the sword needed to be focused. Anyone who tried to challenge Haotian, even if they were not focused, would be disrespectful to Haotian and the hierarch. It was unforgivable. The sword's style came from thousands of miles away and spanned between heaven and earth. The sword flew to Peach Mountain. There were 2 clear light arrays between Peach Mountain, each more powerful than the other. Even a powerhouse at the peak of knowing destiny could not break them in a short time. But Lu Bai's sword was too fast. His sword was as fast as lightning. Lu Bai's sword was so fast that all the barriers in the world were nothing. 2 crisp sounds came from Peach Mountain. It was the glass lamp in Xiankong Temple that broke. It was the inkstone in Jishou Abbey that broke. It was the white bone in the front gate of Devil's Doctrine that broke. It was the iron on the furnace in the back of the mountain of the Academy that broke. The 2 clear light arrays broke as soon as they appeared. Lu Bai's sword turned into a sharp line and sank into the divine hall of light. In front of the altar, the chanting gradually stopped and the sword disappeared. In the giant sedan, the hierarch's figure was still extremely tall in the light. However, the way he stretched out his hands looked so funny and humiliating. The sword went straight to Peach Mountain and did not care about him at all. On the altar, Chun Pippi saw this and laughed. He thought that the hierarch was still an idiot. The hierarch was still the hierarch. He did not transform into a peerless powerhouse because his Tianqi failed. How could it fail? Everyone felt that when the hierarch used Tianqi, the divine hall of light on Peach Mountain had a majestic and shocking divine power. Haotian had sent the divine power, but why did it not enter the hierarch's body? Where did that majestic divine power fall? People looked at a place in the front yard of Peach Mountain with pale faces. Even the national master of the Golden Tribe and Qin Yin could not hide the shock on their faces. It was a little far from the altar, and the position was very remote. The ordinary deacons of the Divine Hall stood there, as well as the inconspicuous servants of the Revelation Institute. The majestic divine power from the Divine Hall of Light fell on the crowd there. It fell on a manservant in Sian. Haotian's divine power continued to pour into his body, and it did not stop. It looked like a bridge. One end of the bridge was on the mountain, and this end was at the bottom. That end was on her, and this end was on him. This was an encounter, and also a reunion. Then they would never be apart again. When I wrote that Lu Bai's sword was too fast, I said 2 words. It's not that I'm muddled, but my brain is muddled. In the dialect of Yichang, Hubei, the word fast can be used to describe sharpness, and the second word, fast, means this. But no matter how I think about it, I can't remember if there is such a saying in Mandarin. Yesterday, I wrote it as ordinary awesome. After writing it today, I thought about it and removed the word ordinary. I'm very satisfied, and I hope that everyone is satisfied too. The key is not how awesome Lu Bai is, or how awesome Ning Ke will be tomorrow. The key is the encounter on the bridge. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 889. The Bridge Did Not Break. The majestic divine power from the divine hall of light on the peak of Peach Mountain came to the front yard and kept pouring into the body of the servant in indigo. In a very short time, his aura changed dramatically. He turned from an ordinary person to a very powerful cultivator, and his cultivation kept rising. In a flash, he reached the peak of knowing destiny state and even went beyond the 5 states. The indigo-robed manservant lowered his head. He was surrounded by divine light and his face could not be seen. The people in front of the altar did not know who he was. They did not understand why the peerless power bestowed by Haotian could enter his body when it was the hierarch who performed the Tianqi. Moreover, it seemed that it would never stop. The power that did not belong to the human world entered an ordinary human and caused a strong reaction between heaven and earth. A wave invisible to the naked eye emanated from the body of the indigo-robed manservant and spread to every corner of the human world. It spread to Chang'an Min Mountain and even to the farthest North Sea. Without a doubt, this was the grandest Tianqi in the history of cultivation. The Tianqi state was the divine sense above the 5 state. It only appeared in the legends of the West Hill and the stories passed down by word of mouth. Ordinary people had never seen it or even heard of it. The guests who came to the right to light were either powerful cultivators or nobles in the human world. They knew about this secret. Some of them had even seen the Tianqi with their own eyes. But they never imagined that the Tianqi could last for such a long time. Why was Haotian so generous to that person? Sang Sang stood on the balcony of the divine hall of light and looked at the flowing clouds on the cliff. She was furious because the power was constantly leaving her body and entering the body of that person in the front yard of the Peach Mountain. She was in the human world, so the Tianqi was naturally grand. As for why this happened, no one in the human world knew. She knew because this had happened before. Many years ago, in the deep winter in Chang'an, she had not yet woken up. She was still that person's maidservant. When that person fought with Xiahou, she held the big black umbrella and stood on the snow cliff by the snow lake. That night, he wanted to sing to her. So she opened up her soul to him. Then she began to sing to the snow lake and to him. She didn't want to sing for him today, but if he wanted to listen, he could. Her power entering that person's body and building a bridge between them made her extremely angry. Although it was not beyond her calculations, she was still angry. After she came to the human world, she wanted to cut off all ties with that human. That was why she did not go to Chang'an. She did not go to see him. However, what happened now proved that even if she seemed to have cut off all ties with him and could no longer sense him, as long as she really started to sing, he would be her only audience. Because from a long time ago, she was his natal. At the moment of the Tianqi, they met again, and it was hard for them to separate. She knew what he was thinking, and he could also know what she was thinking. It was as if the two of them had become a separate world again. The Sang Sang on the snow lake had willingly given her life and soul to that person. But the Sang Sang in the light palace was incomparably furious, feeling abnormally disgusted. Lightning flashed in her eyes. She waved her hand like a knife and cut off the bridge. The power in her body stopped flowing down the Peach Mountain, but she could no longer cut off the ties with the mortal world. She felt the past that only he and she understood. She felt his breath and her face turned pale. No one knew if it was because of the loss of power or because of anger. For some reason, she did not want to kill him at the moment. That was why she was angry and disgusted when they met several times in the Peach Mountain these days. As a result, the divine halls of West Hill were shaken and uneasy, but they eventually suppressed their emotions. However, she could no longer control herself. She just wanted to kill him as soon as possible. No matter what happened, she just wanted him to die. But before she killed him, she had to do one thing first. She wanted to crush the sword behind her into scrap metal. The sword came from the foot of the mountain. It was Lu Bai's sword, the most powerful sword in the human world. She kept looking at the foot of the mountain angrily, ignoring the sword. Because the sword could not even get close to her. Lu Bai's sword was quietly hovering in the air a few feet behind her. The midday autumn light spilled down, illuminating the light palace, a little brighter. When the light passed through the space between the sword and her, there were some slight bends. It was only then that one could see that the space in front of the sword was slightly sunken. Looking closely, one could see that Lu Bai's sword was not static. It was moving forward at an unimaginable speed, but it could not pierce into the space in front of her. Movement and stillness strangely merged into one. It was a very strange scene. There was an invisible barrier protecting her body like a ball, isolating her from the world. Except for the ties with the mortal world, no one could enter her world. This was a space formed by her rules, which was tens of thousands of times more powerful than the realms created by cultivators in the human world. Because Haotian's world did not allow other independent worlds to exist, this space and Haotian's world had the same origin. Although they were not connected, they were vaguely connected, which allowed her to have endless regenerative power. Compared to this, the independent space formed by Yu Lian's cicada wings in the Battle of Chang and seemed so weak. Her small world was the space itself. Lu Bai's sword had distorted the space behind her. It was not hard to imagine how terrifying the sword was, but even so, she could not enter it. She turned around to look at the sword that seemed quiet but was actually flying at a high speed. She reached out her hand. If she wanted to, she could even pluck the stars in the night sky with her hand. Not to mention that this was just a sword in the human world. At this moment, an autumn wind blew into the divine hall of light. Today was the right to light on the Peach Mountain. The divine hall of light was quiet and empty. She was not a human. With this autumn wind, a person came to the divine hall. Lu Bai. Before her fingers could touch the blade, his hand gripped the hilt. He looked at her quietly and pushed forward with his right hand. She did not expect him to appear on the Peach Mountain. Her face showed the first serious expression since she returned to the human world. She frowned slightly. A moment ago, Lu Bai was in the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. The next moment, he appeared in the divine hall of light. Even though he was the most powerful sage of sword in the world, he could not use the limitless state. So how did he get here? She glanced at Lu Bai and saw the ancient sword. Then, she understood. The crisp sound reverberated in the quiet temple. The glaze lamp in the Xiankong temple was broken. The inkstone in the Jishou Abbey was broken. The white bones in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine were cracked. The iron on the back of the mountain of the Academy was broken. It was all because these unknown places in the human world had witnessed Lu Bai's sword. His sword could pierce through the barrier between heaven and man. Therefore, the voices of the human world were harmonious. A small crack appeared in the small world in front of her. The invisible barrier formed by the most basic rules of space was pierced by Lu Bai's sword. The gleaming sword edge moved forward by an inch, getting closer to her body by an inch. Then the inch-long sword edge started to rust at a speed visible to the naked eye. She looked at him quietly and slowly stretched out her finger. Lu Bai could not use the limitless state. How could he come to the Peach Mountain in an instant? Because his sword could travel tens of thousands of miles. And now, he was his own sword. When he held the sword hilt, he could pierce through her small world. Because he was not using the sword in his hand. He was using the sword in his heart. There was an ancient sword in his heart. The sword had killed the golden dragon and the oracle in the wilderness. Today, it became one with him and came to her. She was sure that Lu Bai was the most powerful person in the human world. But she was still expressionless. She stretched out her finger to destroy the sword in his heart. Because she was the rule of this world. Even though Lu Bai's sword could pierce through the barrier between heaven and man and space, she still had time. The eternal and cold time. At this moment, an iron arrow was shot at her back. There was no whistling sound because the iron arrow was too fast. It was almost able to ignore the distance of space. The bridge was cut off by her. The mighty divine power that fell from the divine hall of light to the front yard of Peach Mountain finally stopped. The grandest Tianqi in the history of cultivation had come to an end. The servant in indigo looked up. At this moment, his body was filled with the purest divine power. Every time he breathed, his pores were overflowing with pale white light. People still couldn't see his face clearly, but they could clearly feel the terrifying aura he was emitting. The servants around him all scattered in fear. The servant in indigo lifted his right foot and put it down. The flagstones under his feet cracked and cracked like a field after a long drought. The front yard of Peach Mountain shook slightly as if there was an earthquake. Those who stood close to him were all knocked to the ground. The soil was flipped over and an iron bow appeared in his hand. This iron bow had never been so perfect before. The bowstring was pulled to the limit by his two arms. People even felt that it could break at any time. The bowstring was like a full moon. He silently thought that today could finally be described as a full moon. On the bowstring that was shaped like a full moon there was a black iron arrow. The cold arrowhead was aimed at the sacred chariot high above the front yard of Peach Mountain. The sacred chariot was covered with thousands of gauze curtains and shone brightly. It made the figure in the sacred chariot look extremely tall. The bowstring sounded. The iron arrow suddenly moved forward. The shaft and the diamond engraved on the bow rubbed violently. The talisman on the iron arrow was completed. The iron arrow left the bow, and the tail of the arrow brought with it a terrifying turbulence. Then it disappeared. At the same time the bowstring sounded, people around the altar shouted in shock. Ning Ke! Primordial 13 arrows. People around the altar still could not see the face of the servant in indigo. But they saw the iron bow and knew who he was. There was only one such iron bow in the world. This iron bow belonged to Ning Quebec Ning Ke of the Academy. Today was very tiring. I'll report the details later. There's still one more chapter that I'll continue to write. First of all, I'll thank everyone. The first one is still double the amount. I'll have to trouble everyone to vote for Jiang Yi. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 890. The front yard of Peach Mountain was in an uproar. No one could believe their eyes. They were all waiting for the Academy to come. Who would have thought that the Academy had been among them all along? When Ning Ke pulled his bow and arrow and pointed it at the tall figure in the giant sedan, the people's exclamations became even more panicked. Because everyone knew how terrifying his arrow was. Back in the wilderness, Prince Long Qing, who was about to enter the knowing destiny state, was shot by Ning Ke's iron arrow and became a cripple. At that time, he had just understood the see-through state, but now he had already entered the knowing destiny state. At this time, after seizing the grandest Tianqi in the history of cultivation, he had even surpassed the threshold of the 5 states. How powerful would the iron arrow be? In fact, the hierarch in the giant sedan had already felt the danger before the crowd cried out in shock. He was the most powerful person in the front yard of Peach Mountain. He quickly recovered from his shock and shouted. His new palms danced in front of him at high speed. Suddenly, 10 distinct auras appeared in front of the sedan. These auras had an irresistible majesty, as if they were the rules under the sky. They could be used to guide anything in the world. This was the law of heaven. Back then, the hierarch was severely injured by Yu Lian in the wilderness and became a eunuch. From that day on, he extinguished his lust for sex and finally entered Taoism with the principles of heaven. This was his natal Taoist law. He was indeed the master of the divine halls of West Hill. Even though Ning Ke had taken Haotian's divine power from Tianqi, his state was still unfathomable. How could he be killed so easily? Even with the law of heaven, the hierarch did not dare to try to control the iron bow and arrow in Ning Ke's hands. Because Ning Ke's body was filled with Haotian's divine power, which had surpassed the threshold of the 5 states. It could even be said that he did not belong to this world. The law of heaven could control everything in this world. How could it control something outside this world? The hierarch lord's target was the divine priests and deacons of the West Hill Divine Palace below the giant sedan. 10 laws of heaven's justice fell on the crowd, and his face turned pale. Even the dean of the Revelation Institute and a dozen red-robed divine priests could not control their bodies and came before the giant sedan. Ning Ke's iron arrow had just left the bowstring. After the iron arrow left the bowstring, there was no sound. Only when it arrived in front of the giant carriage and came into contact with the first red-robed god official did a terrifying explosion occur. This red-robed god official was directly turned into a bloody dust by the iron arrow. The iron arrow continued forward and pierced the chest of the second red-robed divine adjudicator. This divine adjudicator was also blasted into bloody dust. In the air between the giant sedan and Ning Ke, there were a dozen red-robed divine priests and the dean and deputy dean of the Revelation Institute. A black light flashed, and a dozen clouds of blood mist appeared in the air. Everyone who stood in front of the chariot died. Whether it was Emoli, the deputy headmaster of the Revelation Institute, or the headmaster of the Knowing Destiny State, they were all blasted into pieces by the iron arrows before they could react. The iron arrow entered the carriage. Tens of thousands of layers of gauze curtains fluttered in the air like disheveled cotton. The tens of thousands of rays of light were extinguished like an oil lamp in a violent gale. With a cracking sound, the huge carriage was broken into pieces, revealing the hierarch's wretched and small body. After using the law of heaven, the hierarch did not hesitate to lie down on the ground. As long as he could avoid this terrible iron arrow, he was willing to do anything. He did not care about the dignity of the supreme Taoist master anymore. But the iron arrow came too fast. Although it had blasted the dozens of divine priests into bloody mist and slowed down after destroying the giant sedan, it was still faster than everyone's imagination. When the iron arrow arrived in front of him, his knees only bent a few inches, his body only had time to tilt a little, and his palms had just been raised in front of him, so he could not completely avoid it. His face was full of fear, and his pupils shrank to the size of beans. With 2 soft sounds, his right hand in front of him turned into a cloud of bloody mist. Then, his right shoulder turned into a cloud of bloody mist. Wherever the iron arrow passed, everything turned into a cloud of bloody mist. One of his palms had been cut off by Su Shi in the Shao Mountain, and another by Yulian in the back of the mountain of the academy. It was only because of Haotian's favor that he could be reborn. But today, his hand was gone again. Not only that, but his right shoulder was also gone, leaving only a horrifying bloody wound. The hierarch howled mournfully, covered in blood, as if he had gone mad. The iron arrow did not stop after destroying the giant sedan. It whooshed and disappeared without a trace. The next moment, it reappeared on the peak of Peach Mountain and shot into the depths of the divine hall of light. That dark iron arrow looked so simple and ordinary. However, wherever the arrow pointed at, it would be easy for anyone to get in its way. Cultivators in the see-through state and knowing destiny state could not do anything about it and were turned into a bloody mist. Even the hierarch lord was seriously injured by the arrow. How could the power of one arrow be so great? It was just a shock, not a surprise. No one was surprised. The 13 primordial arrows were the crystallization of the collective wisdom of the back of the mountain of the academy. They were made by the powerful Tang Empire, and they were the most powerful weapons that could kill people across states. In the past battles, they had already proven their power. Ning Ke was now in the Tianqi state, and he had infinite divine power in his body. Even the Abbey Dean at his peak would not dare to take an arrow from him, let alone these people in front of Peach Mountain. At that moment, people on the front yard even had an illusion that if Ning Kei's iron arrow had not been aimed at the hierarch in the giant sedan, but at Peach Mountain, the entire mountain would have been destroyed by this arrow. This was the one and only 13 primordial arrows in the world. People did not even think that the hierarch could dodge the iron arrow he shot in such a state. Although the hierarch was seriously injured, he was still alive. A powerhouse in such a state, as long as he could still breathe, was a powerful force that no one dared to ignore. Ning Kei himself was not surprised. Unlike ordinary people, the 13 primordial arrows were not like ordinary arrows. The closer the target was, the more powerful the 13 primordial arrows were. On the contrary, the farther the target was, the harder and more terrifying the 13 primordial arrows were. If he could determine the target of the arrowhead, the iron arrow shot from thousands of miles away would be truly powerful, because no one could avoid his arrow unprepared. However, his opponent could observe his movements and react in advance. This was the reason why he could not shoot Yi Hongyu to death with his iron arrow in the many battles he had with her. Even if he was stronger than ever now, the reason would not change. He was standing too close to the giant sedan, and the hierarch could see his movements. With the hierarch's unfathomable state, he could naturally make the most accurate response. In fact, if he hadn't shot the hierarch in the wilderness and gained some experience from it, he might not have been able to hurt the hierarch with this arrow at all. He did not feel regretful that he could not kill the hierarch directly, because in the Academy's plan, the hierarch's life or death was not important. Lu Bai's sword was only a primer. The most important thing was this grand Tianqi, which was to forcefully seize Haotian's divine power and re-establish the connection. He knew that he had achieved this, so he was very satisfied. Ignoring the hierarch, who was covered in blood and disheveled hair, he turned to the powerful cultivators in front of the altar and prepared to shoot again. Until now, no one could figure out when Ning Kei came to Peach Mountain. No one could figure out why the Haotian's divine power entered his body when it was the hierarch's Tianqi. What was the reason for all this? How could there be a cultivator who could break through the 5 states at such a young age? But the powerful cultivators knew very well that they could not let Ning Kei have another chance to shoot the 13 primordial arrows. If he did, no one in front of Peach Mountain would be able to survive. The nation master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, the great divine priest of Baoding, reacted the fastest. First of all, this old man had the most profound state. Second, he was a priest and cultivated his psyche. The most stable person in the world was the priest. The fastest weapon in the world was Psyche. Psyche was faster than any movement. It was faster than Ning Kei's drawing of the bow, and even faster than Lu Bai's sword. The nation master of the Golden Tribe looked at Ning Kei, and the wrinkles on his face deepened. His psyche entered Ning Kei's sense of perception and turned into raging waves, crashing and bombarding. Just like last year when they met in the wilderness, Ning Kei's face turned pale, and he felt uneasy in his sense of perception. His right arm, which was about to take out an arrow from the box, froze. Ning Kei's psyche power was the most powerful among cultivators. However, he was not a psyche master, nor had he cultivated psyche skills. Facing the nation master, who had cultivated psyche skills for decades, he was at a disadvantage. But at this moment, his body and mind were influenced by the majestic Haotian's divine power. How could he be defeated as easily as he was that day? He blinked his eyes, and the annoyance in his sense of perception was burned into smoke, leaving only clarity. At this moment, a majestic force fell from the sky and slapped at Ning Kei's head. Ning Kei was very familiar with this force. He looked up and saw a Dharma statue in front of him. Its monk robes fluttered, and the light of Buddha shone brightly. There was a hint of killing in its compassion. In the deepest part of the light of Buddha, Qin Yen of the Xiankong Temple sat cross-legged with his lips slightly open. This Dharma statue was Qin Yen's Dharma body of Akalanatha. He was reciting the authentic Buddhist mantra. The combination of the two was the most powerful Buddhist mantra emblematic gesture. Back in the Lank Temple, Ning Ke was suppressed by Qin Yen's Buddhist mantra emblematic gesture. His mantra emblematic gesture had reached the advanced level, but he had never cultivated a Dharma body, so he was no match for it. However, that was then, and today was today. Ning Ke's right hand was in the midst of retrieving the arrow. Seeing that it was too late, he turned his hand to the sky. The Dharma body of Akalanatha was full of anger. Its eyebrows were like swords, and its eyes were filled with lightning. It pressed its giant palm to the ground. The autumn forest on the side of the front yard was trembling under the pressure of Buddhism. Red and yellow leaves floated off the branches. Compared to the hill-like palm of the Dharma body of Akalanatha, Ning Ke's palm seemed so small. When the two palms met, the chi of heaven and earth on the front yard of Peach Mountain dissipated. The Dharma body of Akalanatha shattered into countless pieces. Ning Ke had used Haotian's divine power to shatter the seemingly indestructible Dharma body of Akalanatha. A ray of Haotian's divine flame came from the side. Ning Ke did not turn around, but he knew that it must be Zhao Nanhai's sneak attack. He did not pay any attention to that person. His right palm, which had just shattered the Dharma emblematic gesture, clenched in the autumn wind. His fist was hollow, as if it could contain the handle of the cutlass. He waved the cutlass and chopped at Qin Yen in the distance. With a sharp whistle, the cutlass suddenly turned red, and a horrible flame appeared. Even though Qin Yen had not cultivated his body to the level of Buddha, his body was still as strong as Vajra. However, he could not withstand Ning Ke's simple attack. His monk robe was torn, and a terrible cut appeared in front of him. Ning Ke's cutlass did not stop, nor did the whistling sound from the cutlass. The flame was burning, and the figure of the vermilion bird could be vaguely seen. The cutlass came to the front of the national master of the Golden Tribe. The national master closed his eyes and raised the ordinary-looking wooden tripod in his hand. The vermilion bird whistled again. The wooden tripod was burnt black and cracks appeared on it. In an instant, the national master seemed to have aged dozens of years. He spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, Zhao Nanhai's Haotian divine flame fell on Ning Quebec. Ning Ke did not seem to notice it. He turned around and looked at the successor of the great divine priest of South Sea, who was at the peak of the knowing destiny state. The cutlass broke through the momentum, and the man was sent flying dozens of feet away. Then he said, "Idiot." His body was being purified by Haotian's divine power. How could he be hurt by Haotian's divine flame? The front yard of Peach Mountain was dead silent. Ning Ke's body seemed to be burning, and so was the cutlass in his hand. Since there was no chance to shoot the primordial 13 arrows, he used the cutlass. He struck 3 times, and 3 people were seriously injured. Qin Yen, the world wayfarer of Buddhism, great divine priest of the Golden Tribe, the national master of the Golden Tribe, and the stupid Zhao Nanhai. No one could believe what they were seeing. But it was real. Everyone knows the source of the chapter. It refers to Ning Ke and Lu Bai. Continue tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 891. The front yard of Peach Mountain shook violently. Lebu, the most powerful martial artist of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, had finally made his move. His reaction was no slower than that of the National Master and Qin Yen. But because he was a martial artist, it took him some time to reach Ning Ke like a tiger. It did not matter how early he came, because he would have to retreat eventually. Ning Ke heard the whistling sound behind him. He turned his wrist and the black cutlass came back from his shoulder, hitting Lebu's fist. Previously, Li's fist had collided with Tang Xiaotong's iron cudgel countless times. It should be known that the seemingly crude iron cudgel was the sacred object of the devil's doctrine. But when he met it with his bare hands, there was not even a scratch on his fist. It could be imagined how terrifying his martial arts cultivation was. However, when his fist met with the iron cudgel, there was only a cracking sound. Like a wounded tiger, Li howled in pain. His wrist bones were all broken, and his body, which was as strong as a mountain, shook miserably and then fell heavily on the ground. At the same time, the attacks from the South Sea and the divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace had finally arrived. Hundreds of beams of sword radiance flew at high speed toward Ning Kei's body like a storm. Everyone knew that they had to kill Ning Kei in the shortest time possible so that he would not be able to shoot a second arrow. That was why they risked their lives and attacked one after another. However, due to the difference in their cultivation states, the order of their attacks was different. Thus, the national master of the Golden Tribe, Qin Yan, and Zhao Nanhai were the ones with the highest cultivation state. Li was slightly inferior, and the rest were even lower. But this did not mean that the last round of attack was weaker than the first. There were too many people involved. Except for Lu Yiqing and Monk Guan Hai of the Lank Temple, everyone else had combined their strength. If it was a dense rain of swords, no matter how good one's movements were, he would not be able to avoid it. But Ning Kei's bladesmanship had been trained in the Min Mountain wasteland. He was very familiar with it. Moreover, he had learned from Yi Hongyu that the sword garrote of South Jin Kingdom should be at least 1 foot in front of you. Once he used it, even rain could not wet his clothes, not to mention the rain-like flying swords. What was shocking was that Ning Kei did not choose to dodge, nor did he brandish his blade to protect himself. Except for the Taoist sword that cut down an old divine priest from the South Sea, he did not even look at the other flying swords that attacked him. Hundreds of flying swords pierced Ning Kei's body. From the outside, he seemed to have become a hedgehog. However, in an instant, the hundreds of flying swords broke into pieces and fell at Ning Kei's feet like rotten straws. Most of the attacking Taoist swords could not even pierce through the divine light surrounding him. Even the Taoist swords from the West Hill Divine Palace and the South Sea, who were in the knowing destiny state, could only pierce through his clothes and touch his skin. They lost all their power and were instantly shattered. After cultivating the Great Spirit, Ning Kei's body was already as hard as iron. At this moment, his body was filled with the majestic Haotian's divine power. Using the Great Spirit, he filled his body with the divine power, making him even more golden and jade-like. He was even close to the immortal state of the devil's doctrine. How could ordinary flying swords hurt him? The broken swords fell to the ground and piled up to a height of half a foot. It looked like the red and yellow leaves in the front yard of Peach Mountain, piling up into a small hill on the slightly cold ground. Ning Kei was standing in the middle. Looking at the scene in front of the altar, everyone felt a chill in their hearts, especially those powerhouses whose natal swords were shattered by him. They were desperate to the extreme. Today, the West Hill Divine Palace held the right to light. There were at least 20 cultivators in the knowing destiny state in the front yard of Peach Mountain, including the hierarch of West Hill, Qin Yan of the Buddhism sect, and the national master of the Golden Tribe. Could be said that more than half of the top fighting forces in the world were present. However, such a formation was broken by Ning Kei with a single blade. Under the siege of so many powerhouses, he did not have the time to use the primordial 13 arrows again. He did not even have the rumored terrifying divine talisman. He only used the iron cutlass to defeat all the powerhouses in the world. Ning Kei was once considered the weakest world wayfarer in the history of cultivation. But today, who dared to say that he was weak? Who dared to say that he was weak? Who could be stronger than him? Why? Because he had accepted the Tianqi? Why could he accept Haotian's divine power? Even if he had cultivated beyond the 5 states, he was not a follower of Haotian. Why was he not overwhelmed by the Haotian's divine power? Everyone was shocked, speechless. Countless question marks kept echoing in their hearts. At this moment, Ning Ke stabbed the iron cutlass deep into the ground and held the iron bow. Several shouts and exclamations were heard in the front yard of Peach Mountain. Ning Ke's iron cutlass was already so powerful. How terrifying would it be if he used the primordial 13 arrows? They could not allow such a scene to happen. Whether they were injured or not, everyone once again launched a fearless attack on Ningquebec. The chi of heaven and earth in the front yard of Peach Mountain was in chaos. Just like before, the powerhouses with the high estates were the first to react. The great divine priest of Tripod, the national master of the Golden Tribe, looked solemn. The color of the wooden tripod in his hand suddenly darkened and was covered with a thin layer of frost. The national master's powerful psyche power was amplified by the wooden tripod and turned into an extremely cold psyche power mixed with the resentment of countless sacrifices from the grassland. It was aimed at Ning Ke through the air. He firmly believed that even if Ning Ke had the support of Haotian's divine power, he would still be in trouble before his bitter cold attack. However, he did not expect that the psyche power would disappear as soon as it was released. It was like a clay ox disappearing into the sea, and he could no longer find where it went. The psyche power attack was cut off by an invisible force. What kind of force could cut off the psyche power? Almost at the same time, Qin Yen also used his most powerful Buddhism sect method. Qin Yen was an eminent monk of the Xiankong Temple. He was a world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who was as famous as Yi Su and Tang. Ever since the omen appeared in the wilderness 20 years ago, he had been practicing silent meditation with compassion and perseverance. He had been practicing for more than 10 years and no one had heard him speak again. He did not speak even when he was facing the Devil's Doctrine Grandmaster, 23-year cicada cultivation, who was hiding in the forest by the snow lake in Chang'an. Until the autumn rain in the Lank Temple a few years ago, when Ning Ke and Sang Sang were about to enter the Buddha's chessboard and Mr. Second of the Academy, Jun Mo, broke the silent meditation and said a word. It was this word that broke the ancient bell of the Lank Temple, and Jun Mo was forced to leave his back to Yi Su and throw his iron sword away. It was not hard to imagine how powerful this eminent monk's silent meditation was. Now several years had passed and Qin Yen's silent meditation was getting stronger and stronger. When he opened his lips slightly, a white lotus flower appeared between his lips and teeth in the autumn wind. This man had cultivated the Buddha's psyche into an entity. This was even more incredible than his Akalanatha Dharma idol. The white lotus flower floated away from his lips and flew toward Ningquebec. No one knew what kind of power this white lotus would cause when it flew toward Ningquebec. Ning Ke did not know, and he did not want to know. People on the front yard of Peach Mountain wanted to know, but they could not. Because this white lotus that contained endless Buddha's psyche did not float to Ningquebec. Instead, it split into countless petals in front of Qin Yen's face, not far away from his lips and teeth. What kind of power could cut the Buddha's psyche into pieces so quietly? Zhao Nanhai's Haotian divine light attacked Ningquebec. The holy light beam condensed by the divine light was cut off less than 3 feet away from his index finger. Lebu shouted and pounced on Ning Ke again like a wounded tiger. He only took 3 steps forward and a dozen deep wounds appeared on his body. Psyche was cut. White Lotus was cut. Haotian divine light was cut. Even the toughest body could be easily cut down. There seemed to be countless hidden forces in the air around the altar. Those forces were so sharp that they could cut everything in the world. What kind of power could be so terrifying? The broken divine light splashed around miserably. The Buddha's psyche released by the broken white lotus twisted the light. Lebu's blood sprayed like a waterfall. Among the divine light and the blood, there were some looming lines. Those lines were the source of the power. Those lines looked messy, but they were actually in groups of 2. They were the talismans. Dozens of talismans appeared in the air in front of the altar. Those were Ning Kei's most powerful divine talismans. Those were the divine talismans that had cut the Abbey Dean into pieces in Chang'an. No one saw how he made the talismans, because no one knew that he was not only making the enemy's retreat, but also writing talismans. Every cut was a line, and 2 cuts were a talisman. E-talisman. The E-talismans were floating in front of the altar. No one dared to attack Ning Kei anymore. Even the most arrogant and powerful cultivators dared not to be presumptuous in front of these simple characters. The Abbey Dean was a good example. People were shocked speechless, not only because of Ning Kei's miraculous way of writing talismans, but also because he had written so many divine talismans in such a short time. A talisman master needed talent. Not everyone could be a talisman master. But someone like Qin Yan certainly knew some basic principles of talisman Taoism. If writing talismans could be described as writing, then the psyche power of a talisman master would be the ink used to write talismans. And writing a divine talisman required an unimaginable amount of psyche power. No matter how powerful a divine talisman master was in the cultivation world, even a divine talisman master like Master Yen Sei could not write so many divine talismans in such a short time. But Ning Kei did it. He did not even need to meditate to recover his psyche power. How did he do it? The E-talismans floated in front of the Peach Mountain. Countless leaves fell and then broke. Countless screams were heard, and many people lost their heads and legs. Qin Yan and the others looked solemn and dared not to move forward. The iron arrow was on the string, and the iron bow was bent. Looking at the scene in front of him, Ning Kei felt that he had returned to the snowstorm in Chang'an last winter. The Haotian's divine power that Tianqi received was like the infinite power given to him by Chang'an. With this power, he could do many things that others could not think of. He could write many divine talismans. He was full of confidence even when facing the Abbey Dean. It was a very good feeling. This feeling was called invincibility. Only 1 chapter today. I am not in a good state and can't understand it. 3 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 892. The autumn leaves fell from the mountain, and the whole plain was horrifying. Broken arms and blood were flying everywhere in front of Peach Mountain. Dozens of divine talismans were looming around the altar. The powerhouses were pale and coughing up blood. They all ran away. The confinement of Taoist swords in front of Tang Xiaotang was also cut into finer pieces by the cutting talisman in the air. It was a horrible scene. The hierarch lord, who was covered in blood, stood up from the broken chariot. He did not care about his injuries at all. He yelled and struck out with his left palm. Then, several streams of solemn aura attacked Ning Kei's body from afar. The Academy believed in taking things for granted. As long as one had reason, one's state of mind would be strong enough. The hierarch used the law of heaven. The human world was still the world of Haotian. His law of heaven was the truth of Haotian. Naturally, it was powerful. Under the solemn aura, Ning Kei suddenly felt the momentum of waving his knife stagnate. The hierarch was seriously injured, but he could still use such a method. He was indeed the master of the divine halls of Westhill. Ning Kei was invincible in the human world. He could not be trapped by the hierarch's law of heaven. He tried to break it with his mind, but it still took him some time. The hierarch shouted, "Set up the array." In this extremely short period of time, over 1,000 divine priests on the front yard of Peach Mountain, no matter how badly injured they were, sat cross-legged on the ground and began to pray to Haotian. As the hierarch shouted, a beam of clear light rose from the front yard of Peach Mountain and touched the sky. The array of the divine hall was suddenly activated and shrank into a circle of light dozens of feet wide. The white stone altar and Ning Kei were covered in this circle of clear light. Under the guidance and direction of the priests, the tens of thousands of believers on the front lawn also began to pray. Many of the believers were injured, and their prayers sounded more like mournful cries. The prayers of tens of thousands of believers reverberated in Peach Mountain and shot up to the sky. The clear light array shrunk by hundreds of times and its power increased by hundreds of times. It pressed down on Ning Ke on the ground. Facing the array of tens of thousands of people, Ning Ke was under great pressure. He even felt like he was fighting against the whole world. If it were other cultivators, even if they were strong enough to resist the array, they would soon collapse under such mental pressure. But Ning Ke was different. He had fought against the whole world when he was fleeing for thousands of miles with Sang Sang on his back. He had experience in this aspect. He was cold enough and confident enough. With a slight change of his psyche, he used the Great Spirit to convert all the Haotian's divine power in his body into psyche power. He controlled dozens of divine talismans and fiercely rushed toward the clear light array. The clear light array and the divine talismans finally met. Dozens of white marks appeared in the air in the front yard of Peach Mountain, accompanied by a sharp sound of friction. Dozens of divine talismans could not cut through the clear light tactical array in a short time, and the clear light tactical array could not pass through the terrifying power of the divine talismans and fall on Ning Quebec. At this moment, a temporary peace and balance were formed between the clear light formation and the divine talismans. At the same time, the cuts on the clear light formation finally revealed the traces of the divine talismans. People on the front yard of Peach Mountain looked at the dozens of divine talismans surrounding the altar and in the air. They could not help but shiver. They did not see any loopholes. There were no divine talismans floating in front of the altar. But Ning Ke had already pulled his iron bow and aimed the iron arrow at that place. The divine halls of West Hill sat in the south facing north. The front yard of Peach Mountain was the only way to go up the mountain. Ning Ke stood in front of the altar and aimed his iron bow at the north. What did he want to do? It would take a long time to describe the battle. But in fact, from the moment the divine hall of light sent Haotian's divine power into Ning Ke's body, to the moment he shot the hierarch and defeated all the powerful enemies, to the moment the divine talismans shocked the Peach Mountain and the clear light array covered everything, it all happened in a flash. Many people died before they knew what happened. The prayers of tens of thousands of believers and thousands of divine priests and deacons were still echoing in the front yard of Peach Mountain. It was dead silent around the altar. Other than the sound of the talismans cutting the clear light array, nothing else could be heard. The powerhouses of the cultivation world retreated to a distance. They looked at Ning Ke standing in front of the altar and the iron bow in his hand. They were shocked and speechless. No one tried to stop him. They could only wait. Talisman Taoism was undoubtedly the most powerful weapon in the cultivation world. For a divine talisman master, it did not make much difference whether he was fighting one enemy or 10. But talisman Taoism had its flaws. No matter how powerful the divine talisman was, it was still limited by distance. Moreover, the talisman spirit could not last forever. As time passed, it would eventually dissipate into nature. Even though they were suffering from Ning Ke's arrows, the national master of the Golden Tribe and Qin Yen were the top figures in the cultivation world. They quickly figured out what was the most important thing to do at this moment. They retreated to a distance away from the attack range of the talismans and waited for the divine talismans in front of the altar and Ning Ke's Haotian's divine power to dissipate. As for the primordial 13 arrows, they could only pray that Ning Ke did not bring too many iron arrows, or that he would not choose them as his next target. There was no other way. After a short silence, an old and angry voice rang out. The second successor of the South Sea, the old divine priest, pointed at the sacred sedan of judgment with his bloodied hand and shouted, "Yi Hong Yu, how dare you collude with the Academy?" Previously, when the South Sea challenged the West Hill Divine Palace, Yi Hong Yu had killed one of their people. Even this old divine priest, who had an extremely high cultivation state, had lost his finger to her unbelievable methods. He was blaming Yi Hongyu now, not because of the previous grudge, but because of it. At this moment, only he would pay attention to what Yi Hongyu was doing. Only then did he realize that when all the powerhouses were risking their lives to attack Ning Ke, the sacred sedan of judgment did not move. Yi Hongyu did not attack at all. Now that Ning Ke's talismans were floating around the altar, all the powerhouses were forced to retreat, but the sacred sedan of judgment still did not move. Yi Hongyu was still sitting quietly in the sacred sedan. She was not attacked by the talismans. Ning Ke did not even look at her. Other than colluding with the academy, what other explanation could there be? Only Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu could explain all this. Ning Ke did not attack her not only because he did not want to, but also because it was part of the academy's plan. Naturally, he would not explain to the West Hill Divine Palace. Yi Hongyu did not give any explanation. She just looked at a spot with mixed emotions. She was looking at that spot when the powerhouses were attacking Ning Quebet. She was still looking at that spot when Ning Ke used dozens of terrifying divine talismans. She did not fight or dodge. She just looked at that spot without blinking. She looked at the top of the stone steps behind the altar, at the spot where the giant sedan had been. The giant sedan had been broken, and the mysterious hierarch lord had finally shown himself in front of everyone. It was a wretched, skinny, dark and short old Taoist priest. The West Hill hierarch lord's true body looked like this. If it had been any other day, it would definitely have shocked the cultivation world. However, today was the right to light, and life and death were at stake. Who would notice this? Even if they did notice it, who would keep watching when it was a matter of life and death? Yi Hongyu kept looking at the hierarch, as if to her, this matter was more important than life and death. Ning Ke did not know that she had been looking behind him. This part of the academy's plan was made by Third Sister. He did not even know the reason. He was thinking about something else. Many things that had happened to him had shocked and confused the powerhouses in the front yard. For example, when did he surpass the threshold of the 5 states? Why did he have Tianqi? Why did he not die after enduring so much Haotian's divine power? It was all because he was himself. He did not break through the 5 realms, but he could use a divine skill above the 5 realms, and he could only use that one divine skill, Tianqi. This was due to the special relationship between him and Haotian. As for why he did not break the 5 states and was not a devout follower of Haotian, it was because of his body and experience that he did not die from the Haotian's divine power. Last year, when he fought with the Abidine on the snow street, the god-stunning array poured all the chi of heaven and earth in Chang and into his body through the array eye pestle. He had endured even more than today. He could survive that day, not to mention today. Ning Ke knew that just like the battle in Chang'an, the divine power from Haotian was like the natural chi of heaven and earth. It would gradually dissipate and could only last for a while. Moreover, there were not many iron arrows left in the box. If he had an endless supply of iron arrows, he could stand on top of Chang'an and suppress the whole world. Why would he take the risk to come to Peach Mountain? The divine talisman of floating around the altar would disappear at some point. If the divine talisman could last forever, his master Yen Sei would have already trapped the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom. His invincibility could only last for a while. What he needed to do was to complete his mission within this period of time. He looked back at Peach Mountain and the Divine Hall of Light. As he moved, the powerhouses in the front yard suddenly remembered that Lu Bai's sword had entered the Divine Hall of Light. If there was a battle there, it would be the most terrifying one, because it was a battle between the human world and Haotian. In the Divine Hall of Light, Sang Sang raised her right hand and plucked the dark iron arrow from the air. It was as if the iron arrow had been quietly hanging by her hand, waiting for her to pluck it. Her hand could pluck the stars and cover the moon, let alone an arrow. The iron arrow became dim between her tender white fingers. She threw the iron arrow to the ground and looked at Lu Bai. Lu Bai held the hilt of his sword and looked at her. When they looked at each other, there was no longer a gap between them. Countless messages were passed between them. She knew that this human was known as the most powerful person in the world. If he was given enough time, he could become as powerful as that madman. But now was not the time. According to heaven's design, he should not be able to reach this stage. What had happened to him? And even if he had reached this stage, why didn't he continue to wait for hundreds of years until he was at his strongest? She raised her question to Lu Bai. Lu Bai gave a very serious answer. In front of the verdant canyon, I watched Jun Mo and Yi Su's swordsmanship. Li Man asked someone to bring me an aura, which was the Academy's view of the human world. I was enlightened. In Linкong, I saw Yi Su preaching in a shabby alley. In the end, I bathed my sword with hot blood. I was enlightened. It's not easy for an ant to shake a tree. My swordsmanship does not surpass the 5 states. If there is a threshold above the 5 states, I can cut it, even the infinite state. When the sword falls, it cuts myself. Looking at the world, the Abbey Dean is useless. Li Man is not good at fighting. The drunkard and the butcher are just 2 pieces of rotten meat. My swordsmanship is invincible in the human world. That is why I hate them. What hate? I hate not being able to exchange swords with Kohaoran. I hate not being able to drink with Lotus. I hate not being able to be born 1,000 years ago and fight against the light in the wilderness. I hate not being able to be in the same generation as the headmaster. My predecessor has already passed away and the latter has yet to arrive. I want to draw my sword and challenge the heavens. However, the gate of the divine kingdom has been destroyed and there is no way to ascend to heaven. Lu Bai looked at her in front of the sword and said, I don't miss heaven and earth. I just want to cry. At this time, you came to the human world. How can I not come? It's not easy for an ant to shake a tree. Why do you dare to come to the Peach Mountain? This is heaven's question. I am invincible in the human world. Who else can I fight but heaven? This was the answer of the sword of the human world. What is the purpose of human cultivation? In the words of Haotian Taoism, it is a gift from Haotian. But for the Academy and people like Lu Bai, cultivation has nothing to do with Haotian. It is just a means to make human beings stronger. At the end of cultivation, they will raise their swords to heaven. Kohaoran did it. The headmaster had been doing it for 1,000 years. The Academy was still doing it. Now it was the turn of the most powerful sword in the human world. Lu Bai was a sword. The sword in his hand used to be the most powerful sword in the human world. Now he had become a sword and merged with the sword of the human world used by the headmaster. How powerful would he be? This had never happened in the history of cultivation. As he said, he did not break through the 5 states. In the past, he did not dare to break through. Later, he did not care. Now, he did not care. Since he was a sword, if there was a threshold in front of him, he would cut it. As for whether the sword would fall on him, as she said, he did not care. Because to him, this was the only thing that was interesting. Hundreds of disciples knelt in front of the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom, thousands of miles away. The black sword-like mountain suddenly left the ground and pierced the sky. The disciples were shocked. When they looked up, they found that the sword peak was still in the same place. The divine hall of light shook uneasily and the sword style was awe-inspiring. Countless sword marks appeared on the hard bluestone walls. The lamp that had been extinguished for months suddenly broke into 3 pieces. The autumn wind blew from below the precipice and broke into pieces when it reached the balcony. It was like a spring breeze that tickled one's heart. The itch was unbearable. It was not the itch of excitement, but the desire to see Tao. Sang Sang stood on the balcony and looked at Lu Bai quietly. Lu Bai held the sword in his right hand and pushed it forward. He was full of joy. I'm in a much better state today. I feel good writing this chapter. I'm full of joy. I'm going to walk the dog. I'll try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 893. The edge of the sword went in another inch. Lu Bai's sword was 2 inches into Song Song's world. In front of Haotian, a short distance was the end of the world. This meant that his sword had already traveled tens of thousands of miles. Lu Bai was not the first person in the human world to challenge Haotian, but he was the one closest to Haotian. It was not because he was stronger than Ku Haoran or the headmaster, but because Haotian was in the human world. Heaven and man should be separated forever, but there must be a big barrier between them. In this battle in the divine Hall of Light, it was the invisible barrier. That was Song Song's small world. How could Lu Bai's sword pierce into her small world? That was because his sword contained the peak of the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom and the narrow streets in Linkong. It contained the memory of the headmaster slaying dragons and gods in the wilderness, the aura of the human world sent by the academy, decades of hard work, the courage of all the defiance of heaven, and the boundless world. He used the boundless world to break heaven. Hearing the prayers coming from the foot of the mountain, Sang Sang waved her sleeves and a breeze blew down the peach mountain. She turned a blind eye to the sword that was getting closer and closer to her. Lu Bai's sword was corroding at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bright blade became dim, and a layer of greenish-red rust appeared like a cocoon. The rust continued to spread into the sword. She was the rule of this world. Even though she could not reverse the cause and effect, she could perfectly control the most basic and powerful rules in her own small world. These were her weapons. She used time to face the boundless world between Lu Bai's sword. No matter how prosperous the human world was, there would be a moment when the everlasting night came. No matter how green the mountains were, there would be a time when the autumn wind blew and leaves fell. Those great, brave, elegant, and worldly things were all weak in front of time. Lu Bai's sword moved another inch. The inch of blade that entered Song Song's small world instantly showed signs of rust. His sword was getting closer to her. His sword was being eroded by time. This was the closest she had been to the human world since she came to the human world. The distance between heaven and man was less than 3 inches. She did not know that Lu Bai's human sword was 1 inch closer to her. Or did she see the human sword as a rusty iron rod at the bottom of the river? A gust of wind blew out of the divine Hall of Light and landed in the front yard of Peach Mountain. The sect leader's shoulder was heavily injured and was currently bleeding profusely. When the cool breeze brushed past it, the bleeding stopped, and then it slowly recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. New flesh grew out continuously. The powerful cultivators who had been seriously injured by Ning Ke felt refreshed by the breeze. Especially those devout followers of Haotian, except Qin Yan, they found that their injuries were recovering. The dead in the pool of blood could not be resurrected, but those who were still alive felt the mercy and love of Haotian, and felt the miraculous power. Therefore, the prayers of tens of thousands of people became more pious and orderly, filled with awe for God and faith in the light. The great array of clear light of the West Hill Divine Palace seemed ordinary. It was first broken by Lu Bai's sword and then by Tang Xiaotong's iron rod. At this moment it had shrunk to a radius of 100 feet. Its true power was revealed in the prayers. Because of the great array of clear light, Ning Ke could not kill all the powerful cultivators in the front yard. He did not have enough iron arrows, nor could he write more divine talismans. The altar was empty except for Ning Ke, Chun Pipi, and Tang Xiaotang, as well as the lonely divine hall of judgment. Everyone, including the hierarch, stayed far away. No one dared to stand in front of his iron arrows. Looking from the altar to the north, it was obvious that there was an empty passage. Logically speaking, Ning Ke should have left. If he was alone, no one could stop him now that Haotian's divine power was invincible. But he did not take the risk to leave Chang, and then come to the West Hill Divine Palace just to kill a few powerful cultivators for the Academy. What he wanted to do had just begun and was far from over. Moreover, Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaotang were still in front of the altar. Ning Ke felt that the Haotian divine power in his body was slowly draining away. Even though the rate was not fast, if this continued, there would be a moment when his divine power would be exhausted. The talisman floating around the altar and in the sky was swaying in the wind. He did not know how long it could last. He did not turn around and said to Chun Pippi, "Let's go." It was a simple word and an unquestionable arrangement. Chun Pippi did not hesitate and walked down the altar. He supported Tang Xiaotang, who was covered in blood, and walked out of the Peach Mountain. He did not even look back at Ning Quebec. Tang Xiaotang was confused and asked, "What about youngest uncle?" Chun Pippi still did not look back. He panted and said, "If we still want to save him, it will be a waste of energy. Moreover, this is the West Hill Divine Palace. His life and death cannot be decided by man, only by heaven." His ocean of qi and mountain of snow were locked. Coupled with his obesity, his physical quality was even worse than that of an ordinary person. He walked too fast while supporting Tang Xiaotang and was panting heavily. Tang Xiaotang did not understand his explanation, but she knew the relationship between Chun Pippi and Ning Quebec. She took out an elixir and swallowed it. Then, she carried Chun Pippi on her back. She had cultivated in the Devil's Doctrine and had a strong recovery ability. Moreover, she had taken the elixir made by 11th Uncle Wang Qi. Although she was still weak, she was much faster than Chun Pippi. She knew that Ning Ke had taken a great risk to buy time. Therefore, she carried Chun Pippi on her back and rushed out of the front yard without hesitation. Compared to her petite body, Chun Pippi looked like a fat bear in winter. From the back, he could not see her at all, which was a little funny. Ning Ke stood in front of the altar and could not help laughing at the scene. The iron bow in his hand was still steady and the iron arrow on the string did not move at all. No one dared to stand in front of the arrow. In front of Ning Ke's iron arrow was an empty path that no one dared to enter. This path was the most dangerous for enemies, but the safest for allies. No cultivator dared to stop Tang Xiaotang and Chun Pippi. Even the most devout people from the South Sea did not dare to do so. This was the deterrence of the primordial 13 arrows. But the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill did not think so. They were used to life and death on the battlefield. They were devout and zealous protectors of the sect. They did not care about their own life and death. Moreover, they had a large number of cavalrymen. No matter how powerful the primordial 13 arrows were, how many could they kill? The wind blew and dust rose from the mountain path in the distance. Ning Ke could guess what was going to happen. He shouted, "Lu Yiqing!" No one on the front yard of Peach Mountain understood why he would suddenly call out the people from the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom at such a critical moment. Yi Hongyu might have understood, but she was not in the mood to think about it. Lu Yiqing and the disciples of the Sword Garret did not participate in this earth-shattering battle. On the one hand, although he was a great sword master in the Knowing Destiny state, he was still far from the hierarch lord or Qin Yen. On the other hand, they did not know what to do. The Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, was a visiting professor of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom had always regarded itself as a part of Taoism. Although they were too proud to submit completely to the Divine Halls of West Hill, they had never thought of betraying them. The South Jin Kingdom and the Tang Empire were mortal enemies. There was no kindness between the Sword Garret and the Academy, only hatred. Logically speaking, they should be on the side of Taoism. However, Lu Bai's sword had entered the Divine Hall of Light. Everyone knew what this meant. Lu Yiqing asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Ning Ke said, "Leave with the Academy." The disciples of the Sword Garret did not know what to do. If they did not leave now, the Divine Halls of West Hill would definitely hold the Sword Garret accountable. But if they left with the people from the academy, wouldn't it be announcing to the world that the sword Garrett had betrayed Taoism and sided with the Tang Empire? They looked at Lu Yiqing. The Sage of Sword was doing something outrageous in the Divine Hall of Light. They could only wait for Lu Yiqing to make the most important decision. The situation was tense, and they did not have much time to think. Lu Yiqing closed his eyes and felt the faint sword style coming from the Divine Hall on the peak. He stomped his feet and shouted, "Let's go!" The disciples of the sword Garrett looked uncertain. But they finally made up their minds. They kowtowed to the Divine Hall of Light 3 times and rushed out of the front yard of Peach Mountain. Soon, they met up with Tang Xiaotang, who was carrying Qin Pippi on her back. Since they left on the same path, they were on the same path. The cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill were already in formation on the mountain path. The disciples of the sword Garrett pressed their hands on the hilts of their swords and looked solemn. Some of their eyes were already red. Protect the seniors from the academy. Lu Yiqing was supported by his younger brother. He held the hilt of his sword and tilted his head to listen to the hoofbeats coming from the front. He thought of his brother who was fighting in the Divine Hall of Light behind him. He shouted tragically, "Anyone who stands in our way will die." Although the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill were powerful, they had been defeated by Tang Xiaotang and had witnessed many unbelievable situations. How could they be a match for the disciples of the South Jin Kingdom who were determined to die? Especially when Lu Yiqing and Tang Xiaotang fought with their lives, they were quickly defeated. The sword Qi on the mountain path gradually faded away. Only the hoofbeats and the painful groans of the injured cavalrymen could be heard. The prayers on the front yard did not stop, but became much lower. The people of the Divine Halls of West Hill, and the guests who attended the Right to Light still could not believe what they saw. The hatred between the Academy and the sword Garrett was as deep as the ocean. Jun Mo's right arm was cut off by Lu Bai and Lu Yiqing's eyes were blinded by Ning Quebec. Why did the sword Garrett and the Academy join hands after Ning Ke said a few words? That was because they could not understand. For the Academy and the sword Garrett, losing an eye and losing an arm was normal. Since the battle was fair, the ending should be fair too. As for the alliance between the Academy and the sword Garrett, it actually started when Chao Xiaoshu visited the sword Garrett and confirmed that Lu Bai's sword had flown up the Peach Mountain. The disciples of the Academy and the sword Garrett had already left. Ning Ke was alone in the front yard of the Peach Mountain. In the eyes of others, he should have looked a little lonely, but he seemed to have become even more terrifying. Because he no longer had anything to worry about, he could do whatever he wanted, he could start doing what he wanted to do. So he raised the iron arrow. After the Tianqi, his power had far exceeded the scope of the human world. The bowstring was pulled to the fullest, as if it was about to break. The arrowhead did not tremble at all. It pointed coldly and terrifyingly to the north. There is one more chapter. Try to finish it before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 894. What was the most famous and terrifying weapon in the cultivation world? It was not the headmaster's cudgel, Koharan's sword, the chief preaching monk's iron staff, or the abbey dean's psyche. It was a bow and arrow. In the eyes of future generations, the primordial 13 arrows was undoubtedly a milestone weapon. Its power was so great that it made people speechless. It was a pity that only the Academy and the Tang Empire could create such a weapon, and only Ning Ke, a freak who cultivated both Taoism and talisman, could use such a weapon. The primordial 13 arrows ignored space, and even seemed to break free from the shackles of time. The iron arrow was made of the toughest material in the world. How powerful would it be when it was fully released? When Ning Ke was in the see-through state, he could cripple Long Qing with one arrow. When he was in the knowing destiny state, he could make all the powerhouses in the Lank Temple flee. Today, He had entered the Tianqi state and killed more than 10 powerhouses from the divine halls of Westhill with one arrow. He had even driven the hierarch Lord crazy. No one could completely avoid the primordial 13 arrows in the Tianqi state. Other than the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, no one could. At least not the people in front of Peach Mountain. Looking at the bow in Ning Kei's hand and the dark iron arrow, the people on the front yard of Peach Mountain felt a chill run down their spines. Some even felt weak in the knees. They could not imagine what they would do if the arrow was aimed at them, or even if it was aimed at them. They had never thought that they would face the threat of such a terrifying iron arrow at such a close distance. But in fact, it was also a kind of luck. The real power of the primordial 13 arrows came from its silence and unpredictability. Because it could fly through the air with talisman intent, there was no such thing as range. Therefore, distance was not a concern. In fact, the farther away the better. Everything was relative. There was no such thing as a perfect weapon in this world. The primordial 13 arrows also had a flaw. Or rather, the flaw lay in Ning Kei who held the bow. The farther the distance, the more powerful the primordial 13 arrows would be. But the problem was that if the distance was too far, beyond the limits of human vision, he would not be able to aim at the target. Xia Ho's tall and burly body would become the tiniest dot from thousands of miles away. No human could see him with the naked eye, not even the headmaster. Back in Tianqi Mountain, Ning Kei was able to shoot Long Qing from more than 10 miles away with his psyche power instead of his eyes. Long Qing's misfortune was that he had just seen through the confinement made of firewood and was about to enter the knowing destiny state. He was as bright as the sun in Ning Kei's sense of perception. With Ning Kei's current cultivation state, if he wanted to aim at a target far away, he needed to be at least at the peak of the knowing destiny state and completely release his state. It would be best if he could break through the realm. Who would release their full power at the exact moment he drew his bow? Why should the target coordinate with his aim? Who would break through the realm when Ning Kei was shooting arrows? It was not every day that someone broke through the realm in the cultivation world, not to mention the moment when he shot the arrow. Not everyone would be as unlucky as Long Qing. Although the powerhouses present were not very clear about the secrets of the primordial 13 arrows, they had vaguely deduced some principles from the experience of fighting with Ning Kei over the years. Therefore, when they saw him draw his bow to the fullest, they were extremely nervous and anxious and wanted to know who he was going to shoot. Where would his iron arrow be shot to? Ning Kei raised his iron bow and looked to the north quietly. He was not looking with his eyes, but with the psyche power in his sense of perception. He was using his psyche power to perceive the world, and the projection of the world became an ocean in his consciousness. This ocean was the entire human world. There were a few light spots in the ocean. There was a thick and bright light spot in the extreme west, and the light spot in the northeast was even bigger and brighter. Only by looking closely could one find that there were actually 3 light spots there. There were also light spots around him, especially the unfathomable sea of light behind him. Ning Kei was now in the Tianqi state. Excluding some cultivators who might be breaking through the realm, these light spots that he could sense belonged to the powerhouses. The brighter the light spot, the higher the state of that person was. The unfathomable sea of light behind him was, of course, her. She was so bright that she had completely covered Liu Bai's aura. The thick and bright light spot in the extreme northwest was, of course, the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple. The 3 light spots in the northeast were, of course, the eldest brother, the drunkard, and the butcher. All the powerhouses were in his eyes. At this moment, he seemed to have become the high-end version of the hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane. This was unreasonable, because he was not in tomes of Arcane, but a human being. There was no reason for the human world to become the ocean in his consciousness. Many years ago, on the journey from the city of Wei to Chang'an, Liu Qinchen, the guide of Ning Kei's cultivation, had a conversation with him. During that conversation, Ning Ke said that when he was meditating in his dream, he once felt a sea. At that time, Liu Qingchen thought that was just a dream, and that he had no potential for cultivation. Because during the initial awareness state, the range of one's perception of heaven and earth was the size of a cultivator's potential. In the recorded history, Liu Bai had the strongest perception at the initial awareness state. When Liu Bai was at the initial awareness state, he saw a magnificent yellow river. How could Ning Ke see a sea? But now he really saw a sea at the foot of the Peach Mountain. I think I'm the sea, Ning Ke said to himself. During these years after he could cultivate, he had recalled the conversation with Liu Qingchen many times. It was not until this year that he realized that it was all because of Sangsang. When he was meditating in his dream, he held Sangsang in his arms. With Haotian in his arms, he could feel the entire human world. So what? Today, he came to the Peach Mountain and endured the Tianqi. Haotian's divine power entered his body, and he reconnected with Sangsang, which was equivalent to holding her in his arms again. Then why couldn't he feel the sea in the human world? Could it be that he wanted to shoot at the light spots in the sea? The chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple, the drunkard or the butcher? No one knew. Ning Ke, who was standing in front of the Peach Mountain, could feel the entire human world. But before that, the entire human world had already felt him. Because of that grand Tianqi. In the small town at the border of Song and Yen, the calligraphy and painting shop was filled with the aroma of wine. There was only a bowl of water on the table in front of the eldest brother, but he looked as happy as if he was drinking fine wine. Because he knew that the youngest brother was still alive. The drunkard's voice was unusually hoarse. How could the divine power of Haotian enter a mortal's body? The eldest brother said, "My youngest brother can't be reasoned with by common sense." The drunkard suddenly raised his eyebrows. The flagon tied to his waist moved even though there was no wind, and it even floated to a position parallel to the ground. His clothes suddenly blurred, as if he could disappear at any moment. He did not know that Ning Ke was aiming at him in front of the Peach Mountain, but he felt the danger. The eldest brother said, "You are too fast, so you will not be his target." The drunkard thought of the previous conversation, and his expression gradually turned serious. "You just said, the butcher is very slow." 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 895. There were 4 pig trotters on the chopping board. The trotters had been dehaired and watered. They looked like tender lotus roots that had just been plucked from the mud. A thick knife slid across the chopping board. The yellow straw paper unfolded like lotus leaf. The 4 trotters fell into the paper and rolled up. The butcher handed the wrapped trotters to the waiting lad without saying anything. Li Guangdi took out some copper coins and placed them on the table outside the butcher's shop. Then he turned around and walked out. Suddenly, the butcher felt something and looked up. His eyes passed through the smoke-blackened wall and looked in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom in the south. His face suddenly turned pale. The big white pig hanging on the iron hook behind the butcher's shop suddenly moved. The butcher's knife also trembled. There was no wind, but there was a whistling sound. The butcher held the knife and looked in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. He understood something. So he lifted the thick and oily knife as fast as he could and held it with both hands. He covered his face so that no wind or anything else could penetrate it. The big white pig hanging on the iron hook was still swaying. The blood in the pig's abdomen was shaken out and dripped to the ground. It sounded like a clock. Time passed slowly. Nothing happened. The butcher squatted in the corner with his back bent. He held the thick knife with both hands and covered his face, like a turtle hiding in its shell. Outside the butcher's shop, Li Guangdi and Zhang Nianzu walked toward the calligraphy and painting shop. If they got closer, they could hear one of them mumbling something, as if he was memorizing something. Zhang Nianzu asked nervously, "Did you see anything wrong?" Don't talk. Li Guangdi looked very nervous. He stared at him and said, and don't think about taking notes and paper. Just remember it with your brain. Zhang Yanzu shut his mouth tightly and didn't say anything else. Li Guangdi recalled the scene he had seen and guessed that the butcher's weakness was his face. The 4 pig trotters wrapped in yellow straw paper were swinging in the hands of the 2 lads. They looked no different from the human arms cut off by the butcher. In the front yard of Peach Mountain, thousands of miles away, Ning Kei's iron arrow was no longer aimed at the small town at the border of Song and Yen, but at the northwest. The drunkard and the butcher were in that small town. They were the Academy's most feared opponents and also the biggest threat to Chang'an City. He really wanted to see if he could kill them. However, these 2 were great cultivators who had experienced the everlasting night after all. To be able to successfully hide from Haotian for tens of thousands of years, one could imagine how profound their realms were and how powerful their concealment techniques were. Cultivators in the knowing destiny state would have an almost intuitive sense of the possible turning points in their lives, not to mention the drunkard and the butcher. When Ning Kei raised his iron bow and aimed at the town, the drunkard and the butcher sensed it immediately and responded accordingly. The drunkard was ready to leave, while the butcher raised his butcher knife. After the Abbey Dean became disabled, the drunkard became the fastest person in the world. He was even faster than the eldest brother. He was in the distanceless state and had infinite skills. It was hard to kill him unless he was trapped. The butcher had always been the most powerful person in the world. No one, not even Yu Lian, could be mentioned in the same breath as the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple in terms of strength and physical strength. The drunkard was ready to leave, and the butcher raised his knife. Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows could not kill them. Since it could not kill them, he could not shoot them. It was not because he had too few iron arrows and they were too precious. For the Academy, they were willing to pay any price if they could kill the drunkard and the butcher. The reason why Ning Kei did not shoot them was simple. Since he could not kill them, he would not shoot them. He seldom did things that he was not absolutely sure of and that required great risk. The so-called risk, of course, was not to kill them but to anger them. He could not help but feel a little regretful, but not too much. Because the Academy had always wanted to try, but they had never lost their cool. It was a wish, but not an ambition. And the Academy had already made arrangements for the drunkard and the butcher. The iron arrow in Ning Kei's hand was aimed at the northwest, which should be Qinghe Prefecture. As the iron arrow moved slowly, the atmosphere in the front yard of Peach Mountain became more and more tense. Until then, no one knew who he was going to shoot. In fact, even Ning Kei himself did not know. In his perception, Qinghe Prefecture was just an inconspicuous area in the vast sea of the human world. There was no bright spot there. Suddenly, a spot of light appeared in his eyes. So he loosened the bowstring. Jun Mo and Mu Yu stood by the Fuchin River, looking at the magnificent gardens across the river. After a long silence he asked, "Do you understand?" Mu Yu took out the embroidery needle from the cloth and said, "It's a bit troublesome, but not difficult." Jun Mo said, "Then let's go." Mu Yu listened to the chanting from across the river. She frowned and said, "Youngest brother's plan has nothing to do with the 2 of us." Jun Mo said, "He underestimated the warlords. Wang Jinglu could not have done it." In the original plan of the Academy, Ning Kei would go to the West Hill, eldest brother would go to the small town, and second brother, who was seriously injured in the verdant canyon, should stay in Chang to ensure the safety of the rear. But now he was in Qinghe Prefecture, which meant that the Academy was empty. At this time, Wang Jinglu was in the Chui Garden by the Fuchin River. Today, the bigwigs of the Qinghe Prefecture gathered together because the West Hill Divine Palace was holding the right to light. Because of the tense situation in the prefecture, many of them could not go to the Peach Mountain to worship, so they chose to hold the ceremony in the Chui Garden. He entered the Chui Garden through Chui Huasheng. Looking at the pious bigwigs of the warlords by the river, he frowned. Until now, he still could not figure out who his target was. The Qinghe prefecture was ruled by the families. The families relied on history and family rules. But the real reason why Qinghe prefecture dared to betray Chang'an was because of the two knowing destiny masters by the Fuqian River. Not many people knew who the two knowing destiny masters of the Qinghe prefecture were. Even Wang Jinglu did not know. Even if he knew, it would be difficult for him to complete the task given to him by Ning Quebec. At this moment, a wind came from the south. The wind was not as wet as the great swamp. The few cultivators in the garden felt a sense of holiness. The autumn flowers by the river were covered with a faint luster, looking especially holy. There was an old man under the roofed corridor. He was an unknown person from the branch of the Song family. He was already old and had been dozing off. But now he suddenly opened his eyes. The divine talisman moved the Peach Mountain and the Tianqi shocked the world. All the cultivators knew that something big had happened on the Peach Mountain because they felt the qi of heaven and earth changing drastically. The accuracy of this perception depended on the state of the cultivator. Grand cultivators like the drunkard and the butcher could naturally sense it more clearly. But Wang Jinglu, who was at the peak of the see-through state, could only guess roughly. It was enough for him to guess roughly. According to the agreement between them, as soon as he sensed this, it would be the time to act. Wang Jinglu had been watching all the movements in the field. Looking at this scene, his heart skipped a beat. He knew that he had finally found one. But how could he force the opponent to release all of his state? He was known to be invincible among those below the knowing destiny state. But just as Chun Pippi had said, he was invincible among those below the knowing destiny state. A cultivator in the knowing destiny state did not have to release all of his state when facing him. At this moment, a man wearing a bamboo hat and a walking stick and a woman dressed in red appeared by the stream of the Chui Garden on the banks of the Fuqian River. No one could clearly see how they had appeared. Urgent alarms sounded in the Chui Garden. The sound of scabbards colliding could be heard everywhere. An ancient array was slowly released from the pond in the garden. The old man of the Song family slowly raised his head and looked at the man and woman by the stream. Jun Mo did not look at the old man of the Song family. Although he knew that the old man was one of the knowing destiny state that his younger brother was looking for, he was not the one he was looking for. The one he was looking for was even more powerful. The Chui family of Riang was the head of the 7 families in Qinghe County. The Chui Garden was their property. The head of the family, Chui Shi, was naturally the one with the highest status. But today, in the Chui Garden, he could only stand. Because Elder Chui was sitting, he, as his son, could only stand. Elder Chui had once been a Grand Secretary in Chang'an and a Prime Minister. When he retired, he was given the title of Grand Tutor. That was why he sat in the Grand Tutor's chair and drank Grand Secretary's tea. Looking at the man and woman by the stream, Elder Chui slowly put down the tea in his hand. His face revealed a complicated expression. There was some confusion, some fear, and some mockery. Seeing the man's empty sleeves, he knew the man's identity. Elder Chui did not expect that the Academy would disregard the agreement with the West Hill Divine Palace and send someone to Qinghe County. He did not expect it to be this person. In a very short time, he woke up from his confusion. He remembered that the headmaster he feared the most had already ascended to heaven. The Academy was no longer the Academy of the past. If it was in the past, I think I would not have the courage to fight Mr. Second. Elder Chui looked at Jun Mo by the stream. His expression gradually became calm. He said, "But you have lost an arm and have not recovered from your injuries. How can you be my opponent?" With these words, the array in the Chui Garden exploded. It was indeed a family with a long history. The array by the Fuqian River was indeed powerful. The aura of heaven and earth was chilling. Jun Mo knew that this person's judgment of the situation was correct. If it was in the past, he would have killed all the enemies in the garden with his iron sword alone. But now, he might not even be this person's opponent. But he did not say anything, nor did he do anything. Mu Yu picked up an embroidery needle and pierced it into an autumn lotus in the stream. Her movements were very natural, as if she had done it unintentionally. Elder Chui's expression suddenly changed. The terrifying array by the Fuchin River had been broken in the wind. The families of Qinghe County indeed had a very rich history. They had existed even longer than the Academy. But that did not mean that they were powerful. Otherwise, the tortoise would have long ruled the world. Mu Yu was the bride. She was the seventh sister who loved to eat melon seeds, chat, and play cards. She was also the world's most talented array master. She had observed the array for half a day by the Fuchin River and had long seen through it. Junemo looked at Elder Chui quietly. Elder Chui looked at him and said indifferently, "When I was the Prime Minister, I went to the Academy many times and saw you as a child. I never thought that I would kill you today." Qinghe County still had many spies in Chang'an. Elder Chui was very sure that Junemo had not recovered from his injuries. More importantly, no one knew that he was not only in the Knowing Destiny state, but also at the peak of the Knowing Destiny state. Although the big array by the Fuchin River had been easily broken by the girl from the Academy, Elder Chui was still confident that he could kill Junemo by the stream. Wang Jinglu's face became abnormally pale in the crowd. He could not help but be shocked when he saw Mr. Second appear. He was even more shocked when he realized that Elder Chui was the Knowing Destiny state cultivator he had been searching for. According to Ning Kei's plan, he should have made a move now. However, to make a Knowing Destiny state cultivator release his full state, he needed a sufficiently powerful person to use powerful means. But from Elder Chui's tone, he seemed to have endless confidence in defeating Mr. Second of the Academy. How could he do it? Junemo did not make a move either. He only took a step forward. Elder Chui's expression suddenly froze. The elder of the Song household under the corridor stood up with his sword in his arms. Although everyone knew that Junemo had lost an arm and his state was not what it used to be, he was still Junemo. Qinghe County was very close to the verdant canyon. The scene of Junemo single-handedly fighting 10,000 people in the Battle of the Verdant Canyon at the end of last year was like a nightmare imprinted in people's souls. No one dared to underestimate Junemo. Even if Lu Bai were to fight Junemo now, he would definitely treat him as his most powerful enemy. Elder Chui's aura suddenly rose to the peak of the Knowing Destiny state. He looked at Junemo and said with a smile, "Are you surprised?" Junemo looked at him and said, "I am surprised by your stupidity." The wind suddenly blew, the Fuchin River was chaotic, the stream in the Chui garden was boiling, and the autumn lotus floated like a dead fish. An arrow came from the south. Elder Chui's face suddenly paled, and then it collapsed. He became hundreds of pieces of flesh and blood, scattered all over the Chui garden. Because of the Academy, Elder Chui had kept a low profile his entire life, keeping his cultivation state a secret until he was 100 years old. Until today, when Junemo came to the Chui garden, he felt that the opportunity had finally come. He wanted to give the Academy a surprise. He wanted to show the edge that he had endured for many years, and he wanted to vent the anger that he had suppressed for so many years. And so he died without an accident. From the beginning to the end, he did not have the chance to fight with Junemo. Because Junemo did not make a move. He only took a step forward. He only needed to take a step forward, and his opponent would have to show his full state. Because he was Junemo. The elder of the Song family saw Elder Chui turn into countless pieces of flesh and blood, and his expression became abnormally terrified. He had been stuck at the lower level of the short life state for all these years, and he was still one of the few powerhouses in the world. However, he saw Junemo just take a step forward, and Elder Chui, who was at the peak of the Knowing Destiny state, died on the spot. How could he still have the courage? June Mo turned to look at him. The elder of the Song family let out a shrill cry and forced out all his state in despair. The sword in his arms broke through the air. He was only at the lower level of the knowing destiny state. Even if he forced out all his state, he was still not bright enough in someone's sea of consciousness. So there was no second iron arrow from the south. June Mo stretched out his left hand and clenched it slightly in the autumn wind. The flying sword suddenly turned in the air and pierced deeply into the chest of the elder of the Song family. Let me say a few words to everyone. It has nothing to do with canvassing for vote. Yesterday I said 2 chapters, and today's chapter is more than 4,000 words. I really can't write anymore because I need to think clearly about some problems. I thought I had written well recently. I finished earlier last night, so I went back and read it again. In the end, I found that many of the chapters were terrible, really terrible, and I couldn't even find an excuse. I was a little dissatisfied, so I went to read the first volume of The Coming of Night. I found that the first volume was better, but the first few chapters were so dull and stale. Then I went to the second volume, Possessed by the Devil, and found that it was so long. I was still dissatisfied, so I read my favorite Battle of the Verdant Canyon. Only then did I realize that June Mo and Liu Bai's fight was so troublesome. I actually used so many damn short sentences and so many repetitive words. So I had insomnia again. It was pure discomfort. I didn't know why it was like this. I really had a problem with my emotions. It turned out that I didn't write as well as I thought I could. I used to think that I wrote very well. I always thought that this was what I was best at and what I was most proud of. But today I felt that it was really bad, really bad. You don't need to comfort me, I can see it myself. This was a problem of seriousness, time, and ability. If one's ability was not good, it would be difficult to improve in a short period of time. The first 2 should be able to improve, so all the problems were ultimately my own problems. It was a problem of attitude and diligence. I didn't know why I thought so. Maybe after a few days, I would feel that The Coming of Night was especially good. Was it just a period of self-doubt? But I was really depressed. I felt that it was really bad, and I didn't want it to be like this. Tomorrow was the 4th of Saturday. Originally, I thought that it would be double, so I wanted to postpone my leave until later. But now that I was in such a bad mood, I didn't want my monthly vote anymore. Tomorrow, I would rest as usual and reflect on myself. At night, I saw another book review. I found out that the reader, Shooting Bird, had passed away in a car accident in March. His wife posted a post in the book review section, saying that he had been looking forward to writing The Coming of Night until August. I replied that I would write well, so I would definitely write well in the future, better than the previous ones. Cherish the present, we can't waste life. May he rest in peace, and may his wife live a happy life. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 896. The Song family elder felt a chill in his chest. He looked at his flying sword stuck in the ground and saw the blood flowing down the blade. His heart grew cold. Only now did he truly understand that even if he had not recovered from his serious injuries, he would never be a match for June Mo. June Mo did not even truly attack. He just reached out in the autumn wind and grabbed his life-bond sword and took his life. There was dead silence by the Chui garden. The splashing on the Fuchin River had also stopped. The Song family elder slowly fell down. June Mo held his cane and left with Muyu. No one dared to move. Wang Jinglu had been standing in the crowd and did not have a chance to make a move. He looked at the blood and flesh splattered around the historical armchair and thought of Elder Chui, who had turned into a resentful spirit. He then realized that Ning Kei's arrow was like that. He looked at the Song family elder lying in a pool of blood and the flying sword in his chest. He then realized that Mr. Second's sword was like that. It was not until a long time after June Mo and Mu Yu had left the Chui garden that the people in the garden woke up from their extreme fear and shock. There were cries and angry roars everywhere. To Qinghe County, the warlords were everything. The Chui family of Ryong was the people's spirit. Elder Chui's position here was like that of the headmaster of the academy. Now that Elder Chui, whom everyone relied on, had turned into a pile of flesh and blood without doing anything, how could they not be afraid? The news of Elder Chui's death quickly spread throughout Yangzhou City and entered thousands of households. Naturally, Chang'an also received news of the Kingdom of Wind. The Tang Imperial Court reacted very quickly. On that night, the Ministry of Works urgently transferred craftsmen from the 3 counties in the south and south, as well as soldiers from the neighboring states, to the north of the Verdant Canyon. Countless enemies were buried in the Verdant Canyon during the war last autumn. The official road was blocked by huge rocks and was extremely difficult to walk on. The Imperial Court had spent more than half a year clearing a small path. However, with the arrival of tens of thousands of craftsmen and soldiers, the clearing speed suddenly increased. Based on the current speed, it would only take a few months at most for Chang'an to complete the initial cleanup and restoration work. This also meant that the Tang Empire's iron cavalry would only need a few months to pass through the Verdant Canyon and rush south. Like an iron current, they would directly drown Qinghe Prefecture. The nobles and people in Qinghe Prefecture did not know what was happening in the north of the Verdant Canyon, but they knew very well what old Master Chui's death meant to them. The treaty between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace had become a waste paper. The Tang Empire's army could appear in Qinghe Prefecture at any time. The terrifying pressure from the north was like a low-level dark cloud, pressing down on the people of Qinghe Prefecture and making it difficult for them to breathe. They could not understand why the Tang Empire did not seem to need a breather after having just experienced an extremely tragic war to defend their country. They wanted to tear up the peace treaty so quickly. The chaos in Qinghe County had already appeared, and it was impossible for it to calm down. Wang Jinglu did not leave Yangzhou City because he wanted to wait for Chui Huasheng here. Most importantly, he was responsible for receiving the cultivators from the Imperial Center Administration and military spies who were constantly sneaking into Qinghe Prefecture from the Tang Empire. Then, he would use these forces to help Chui Huasheng occupy a better position in the chaos of Qinghe Prefecture. A cylindrical passageway appeared in the air above the front yard of Peach Mountain. After images of turbulence lingered in this passageway, making the passageway even clearer. This was the trace left by the iron arrow, which was also the path of the arrow. Ning Ke stood in front of the altar, holding the bow in his left hand and holding the arrow with his right hand. He was still in the posture of the moment when he released the bowstring, as stable as a wooden statue. The prayers had stopped. The tens of thousands of people in the front yard looked at him nervously. No one spoke, as if they had also become wooden statues. No one knew where Ning Ke's iron arrow had gone, but they knew that someone had definitely died. They did not see the real ending, but they already knew the ending, which made them extremely terrified. Ning Ke put the iron bow back on his shoulder and looked back at the divine hall of light on the top of Peach Mountain in silence. If the Haotian's divine power in his body dissipated, the divine talisman around the altar would also return to heaven and earth. Then, he would definitely die under the siege of those powerful cultivators. But he did not think about this. At this time, he had already completed the first half of the Academy's plan. His attention was now on the divine hall of light. He could vaguely feel the ending of the battle in the divine hall, and he knew that someone would definitely die. Just like how people on the front yard knew that someone would definitely die when they saw him shoot the arrow, now that someone had entered the divine hall of light, he would definitely die. This made him a little depressed. In this battle between heaven and man, the one who died was naturally heaven. Sang Sang looked at the boundless universe on the sword. In her eyes, there were stars vanishing and disappearing, sunrise and sunset, rising and falling tides, and countless seasons passing by in the human world. Lu Bai's sword was only 2 feet away from her. The rust on the sword was getting more and more severe, and its surface appeared to be an ominous gray color, which meant that the sword had completely rusted and was beginning to be weathered. The closer an object was to her body, the faster time flowed in the area where it was located, and the more severe the damage would be. Even a sword that could withstand countless years of wind and rain could not withstand it. It was already very unimaginable that Liu Bai's sword could enter her small world and be so close to her. Common cultivation theories could not even explain it. His sword was the sword of the human world, with the spirit of the sword Garrett and the mortal world. But after all, it was not the human world itself. In the end, it still could not resist the passage of time. The rust seemed to be covered with white frost. Suddenly, it cracked and then turned into green smoke and disappeared. The sword was destroyed, but the person was still there. His was the real sword. Liu Bai's eyes were unprecedentedly bright, even brighter than when he sensed the surging yellow river when he first entered the awareness state, and even brighter than when he comprehended the sword style of the great river on the cliff by the river. The moment he drew his sword, he knew that he could not win, but he did not give up. As he said, this was already his last interest in the human world. He wanted to see how close he could get to the sky, and whether he could touch the sky, or even use his sword to draw a mark in the sky that only belonged to him. Liu Bai's hand reached into Song Song's small world. His hand was very slender, and his fingers were slender. It was the hand that was most suitable to hold a sword in the human world. Every time he held the hilt of the sword seemed to be connected to his hand and could not be separated. At this moment, he did not hold the sword in his hand. His hand was the sharpest blade. He reached out to Song Song's face, as if he wanted to pass through the black hair on her cheek. His hand was getting closer and closer to her face. His fingernails gradually turned gray, and his skin gradually lost its elasticity. It became dry and wrinkled, and his sleeves quietly turned into ashes. Liu Bai continued forward. The mark of time moved up his forearm. The skin on his arm began to loosen, and like a dying old man, it was about to lose the luster of life. He continued forward. With a state of disdain for the human world, he fought the most silent and terrifying battle against the merciless time. It seemed that he had walked for tens of thousands of years, or maybe he had really walked for tens of thousands of years. After a long time, Liu Bai finally reached Sang Sang and walked into her small world. So she was only a foot away from him. Regrettably, he was too weak to lift his hand and make the last stab. His white hair draped over his shoulders and withered like the grass covered with frost. The wrinkles on his face were as deep as the bluestone slabs in the east of Lincoln. He had become an old man who was about to die. Sang Sang said, "You have lost." Liu Bai said in an old and tired voice, "You have lost." Sang Sang frowned slightly, not understanding what he meant. "I have left a sword in the human world. I hope that sword will not disappoint the human world." Liu Bai looked at her and said with a smile, "But it has nothing to do with the outcome of this battle." Sang Sang said, "How can you defeat me now?" Liu Bai took a few breaths and slowly raised his withered arm with difficulty. He touched between her eyebrows with the tip of his finger. It was not lethal, but more like a touch. In this world, there was no such thing as a man conquering the heavens. In fact, it had never happened before in the history that could be seen. However, for countless years, many people had fought for it. They wanted to win and show Haotian the power of the human world. But most of the time, they just wanted to prove to themselves and the human world that as long as you were willing to work hard, you could achieve what you wanted. Liu Bai was invincible in the human world. He came to Peach Mountain, entered the divine Hall of Light, and challenged heaven to a battle. He did not think he could win, but he wanted to prove something. At the moment before his death, he finally touched the high and cold sky. He had fulfilled his wish, and he saw his own great way. Sang Sang looked at the skinny arm in front of her and remained silent. Liu Bai's body was like a dried-up riverbed, turning into countless pieces of dry soil. He collapsed and fell to the ground with a rustling sound, turning into a pile of dust. No one could be truly immortal, and no one could truly live for thousands of years. Even the strongest city wall would turn into sand, and even the strongest river would dry up one day. But no one could deny, not even heaven, that the city wall had once stood tall in the human world, and that the yellow river had once flowed for thousands of miles. In the air in front of Sang Sang, a sword suddenly appeared. The sword was full of ancient chi, but there was no vitality in it. It fell to the ground with a crisp sound. The sword in Lu Bai's hand had already turned into ashes. His body had also turned into ashes. However, the sword was still there. It was as shiny as new and was not damaged at all. It was like the world after the calamity, as if it was foretelling something. Sang Sang looked at the pile of dust and the ancient sword in front of her, and did not say a word. This was the real meaning of her first attack in the human world. It seemed to be an understatement, but it turned the most powerful cultivator in the human world into dust. But her face was a little pale, not knowing whether it was because she was injured or because of other reasons. I haven't slept for more than 30 hours. After updating, I'll go eat. After eating, I'll try to fall asleep. See you tomorrow. P.S. I've been strong before, so I should always be strong. Let's work hard together. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 897. A gust of wind blew in the divine hall of light. The wind was gentle, like a pair of invisible hands, picking up the ashes on the ground and slowly walking out of the divine hall. Sang Sang walked with the ashes and left the balcony. She slowly walked to the cliff yard outside the divine hall and looked down at the snow-like ashes falling from the sky. The front yard of Peach Mountain was in chaos. The offerings for the right to light had disappeared. Dozens of divine talismans were clearly visible on the array of clear light. Ning Ke had done a lot. She looked at the figure in front of the altar and could no longer control her anger. So the cool breeze in the mountain suddenly became violent, whistling from the divine hall to all directions of the human world. Autumn in Lincoln, the capital of South Jin Kingdom, was not so clear. Instead, people were suffering from the autumn rain. The streets and alleys where the poor lived in the eastern city were even dirtier because of the autumn rain. The dirty water over the broken bricks gave off an unpleasant smell, even worse than the toilet under the curtain. Suddenly, a breeze came from the south and howled through the alleys, sweeping away the unpleasant smell. Yi Su was checking the abandoned waterways with a dozen students, making arrangements for the renovation and maintenance after winter. He looked back in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and sensed something. He looked at the gentle breeze lingering in the streets and said emotionally, "You really saw it." He said this to his old friend who had left the human world. Before Lu Bai left Lincoln, Yi Su had hoped that Lu Bai could see the Great Way. Lu Bai saw it, so he was very happy. Autumn in Fuchin River was so charming. The autumn trees by the bank were changing colors, reflecting in the clear water. It was as if the water was dazzling. Junimo and Mu Yu walked out of the Chui garden and suddenly felt the wind was getting stronger. He walked to the bank and looked at the broken reflections. After a long silence he said, "I'm going on a long journey." He felt that Lu Bai had left the human world. So did Mu Yu. But she didn't understand why Junimo would make arrangements for Lu Bai's departure. "Where are you going?" she asked, looking a little uneasy. "I want to go to Xiankong Temple. Since I want to learn Buddhism, I have to go there," Junimo said. Looking at her expression, he continued, "I will only cultivate Buddhism, not become a monk." Mu Yu asked, "Why did you make such a decision?" Junimo said, "She's too powerful. Junior brother may not be able to control her." Mu Yu looked at him and asked, "Actually, you just envy Lu Bai." Junimo said, "Yes, I envy him. But Yi Su and I were in the sword he stabbed at Haotian today, so I'm very grateful to him." In autumn, the wilderness had long been cold. The wind blowing in the desolate wilderness seemed to be filtered by ice and snow. Once it touched the body, it felt cold like needles piercing into the bones. Tang Lu puffed out her chest, but she didn't feel anything. She was still continuing the unfinished conversation with her teacher in the carriage on her shoulder. Even if Lu Bai's sword can make her emotional, what's the point of being emotional? If she's sentimental, junior brother will have a chance. Yu Lian sat in the carriage as if she was sitting on a hill. She looked to the south and slowly raised her eyebrows. There was a lot of information in the wind. Tang also sensed the information and suddenly felt the wind blowing on his chest was a little cold. Yu Lian said, "Lu Bai is dead? She's really invincible. It's meaningless for us to go to Peach Mountain. Except for Ning Ke, no one can defeat her." Tang said, "I'm just a little worried." Yu Lian said, "Tang Xiaotang, Pippi and Ning Ke are all on Peach Mountain. The Divine Hall even asked the House of Red Sleeves to go to Peach Mountain. Do you know what that means?" "I don't know. There's a girl named Xiao Chao in the House of Red Sleeves. She used to be her best friend in Chang'an. Tang Xiaotang is her best friend in the back of the mountain of the academy. Pippi is very close to her, not to mention Ning Quebec. It means that the people closest to her are all on Peach Mountain now." Then, she gave teacher the will of heaven, so teacher gave her the earthly fate. She invited teacher to Haotian's divine kingdom, so teacher left her in the human world. If she wants to go back, she has to cut off her earthly fate. How to cut off her earthly fate? The first thing she has to do is to cut off her earthly fate. She wants to kill Xiaotang and the others. Yes. Then shouldn't we be more worried? How can it be so easy to cut off her earthly fate? Yu Lian said, "I think she must be very distressed now." Tang asked, "What is the Academy's plan?" Yu Lian said, "The Academy has no plan at all." Tang was a little surprised and asked in confusion, "No plan?" "Yes. As I said before, God's plan is better than man's plan. So why bother? We don't need to do anything." Yu Lian said, "The Academy asked Ning Ke to go to Peach Mountain. Is that enough? Since we can't beat her, then let her do it herself. Anyway, no matter what she does, she can only make the situation what youngest brother wants." "Why is that?" "Because she is youngest brother's natal." Tang was very shocked and did not know what to say. Yu Lian looked at the high sky and said with emotion, "Teacher took youngest brother as his last disciple. Now that I think about it, it is because of this." Tang frowned and said, "But she should be able to predict this. Even God's plan can't predict one's natal." In fact, Yu Lian did not know that the reason why she could not include Ning Ke in her plan was not only because Ning Ke was her natal, but also because Ning Ke did not belong to this world. Tang said with emotion, "So not calculating is also a kind of calculation. Our enlightenment doctrine is best at scheming. Since Uncle Lotus, we have calculated everything in the world. But even teacher couldn't predict her, so I can't either." The wind of the wilderness blew her hair. Yu Lian withdrew her gaze and looked in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom in the south. She said, "So I waited for her to calculate her death. The devil's doctrine was good at scheming. If Lotus had not had that story with Ku Haoran, the devil's doctrine would have been dominating the human world under his scheming. As the current leader of the devil's doctrine, Yu Lian was naturally very talented in this aspect. Just as Tang said, she did not calculate Haotian, which was actually the most incredible kind of calculation. Except for Haotian, everything else was in her calculations. Letting Xiong Chumo go at the back of the mountain of the academy last year and ignoring the people from the South Sea were all part of her calculations. As for what would happen in the end, she was not sure. But she was sure that Taoism would continue to decline. The decline of Taoism meant the power of the academy. Tang suddenly said, "In fact, sometimes I have been thinking about what the human world would be like if Master Lotus did not have that story and was still alive." Yu Lian said, "Not to mention Lotus, even if I did not enter the academy, At least half of the human world would be the territory of the Enlightenment doctrine. Tang looked back at her and asked, "Teacher, do you feel any regret?" "What regret? As long as youngest brother could win, the entire human world would belong to the Academy." Yulian opened her arms as if she was going to embrace the entire world. The breeze blew gently and then gradually died down. The peach blossom petals on the front yard of Peach Mountain danced again. The array of clear light trembled and dozens of divine talismans gradually dimmed. Ning Ke knew that Lu Bai was dead. He was not surprised by the outcome of the battle between heaven and man. All human beings who challenged Haotian in history ended up on the road of no return. Even though the headmaster was still in the Night Dome, he could not come back either. The Academy did not have a plan, but they had been waiting for a change. The change was not Lu Bai's sword that represented the human world, but the subsequent change brought by the sword. All the process was to serve one purpose: to re-establish the natal connection between Ning Ke and her. Only in this way could the human world retain the last chance of winning. Lu Bai's sword went to Peach Mountain. The hierarch had Tianqi. The change that the Academy had been waiting for finally came. Her Haotian's divine power entered his body. It did not mean victory, but he was sure that the connection had been re-established. That was why he was calm. She was furious. The gate of Haotian's divine kingdom was destroyed. She was left in the human world with no way back. From the moment she woke up, the first thing she did was to completely cut off the connection between her and Ning Quebec. That was why Ning Ke could not feel her presence in Chang'an. However, she did not expect that the Peach Mountain today was like the Yanming Lake several years ago. She had re-established that connection with him. She stood in front of the divine Hall of Light, but she could feel everything about him at the foot of the mountain. He was sad because of Lu Bai's departure, so she was sad too. He was happy because he could feel her, so she was happy too. She was sad for his sorrow, happy for his happiness, and angry for his anger. She became angrier and angrier. She was the great Haotian, and he was a lowly human being. How could she become his natal? It was the dirtiest blasphemy for her to feel his every emotion. However, anger should not be an emotion that Haotian should have. It meant that she was becoming more and more human, and that she was being affected by him. So she became angrier and angrier. It was not until now that she realized that Chun Pippi could escape from the Peach Mountain and not be burned to death by her divine flame. It was because of herself. Many years ago, Ning Ke had said something to her. "I've mentioned the Academy student called Chun Pippi to you. Remember him for me. I owe this guy my life. Remind me to find a way to return it to him at the right time and place." She had always remembered this. That was why she wanted to kill Chun Pippi and cut off her bond with him. However, no matter how she calculated, Chun Pippi would still be alive. No matter how she cut off the connection between her and Ning Ke, the connection had always been there. She was always his natal. This fact had never changed. She wanted to cut off her bond with him, but she could not. Instead, it became more and more chaotic. How could she not be angry? The 3 unconnected chapters are the main plot of this scene. Please participate as soon as possible. The book review competition of the night will end in 4 days. Everyone, please participate as soon as possible. The rewards are very generous. There will be Chidian coins and signed books. I have learned a lot from the participating book reviews. I am very grateful to everyone. I have figured out some things in these few days which should be helpful. For example, I am ready to give up the plot outline. There will definitely be a period of time where I will not be used to it. I am not in a good state recently, and I am going to go out the day after tomorrow. Recently, I will update a chapter every day. I will report to you. Of course, I will not take any tickets. We will talk about it when I recover. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 898. The Divine Kingdom was hard to open, and the right to light would fail. These things were all within God's calculations. But she was still angry when they happened. Looking at the figure in front of the altar at the foot of the mountain, thinking of how he had ruined everything and how he had dared to use his divine power to kill his own followers, her hands behind her back began to tremble. Everything in the world was within her calculations except for Ninquebek. She did not expect that he would not only ruin the right to light, but also make a joke out of himself. She became angrier and angrier, so the wind in the human world became more and more violent. It rolled up the dust on the ground and covered the clear autumn sky. Countless dark clouds floated from the East Sea in the distance, dimming the light in Peach Mountain. Then came the heavy rain. The heavy rain was so violent that the autumn forest and the mountain path were instantly soaked. The peach petals on the ground were smashed into pieces, and the uncoagulated blood was quickly diluted and disappeared. The water on the front yard rose at a speed visible to the naked eye. Dead leaves were floating in the water, and broken limbs were faintly visible. The heavy rain blocked people's sight. The whole world seemed to be empty except for the cold and wet rain. The rumbling of the rain sounded like thunder. The power of heaven and earth was attached to the heavy rain and kept washing Peach Mountain, washing away people's bodies and souls. The tens of thousands of followers on the front yard were pale and terrified, kneeling in the rain. The torrential rain continued to fall, and the light above the sacrificial altar was washed away. Then, it gradually disappeared without a trace. The dozens of divine talismans that were fighting against the clear light also gradually faded until they disappeared. The hierarch, Qin Yen, and all the other powerhouses in the human world were suppressed to the ground by the rain. They were in a higher state than the ordinary followers and had more sensitive senses. Therefore, they could clearly feel the anger of Haotian in the rain. They were even more frightened, kneeling on the ground with pale faces, and did not even dare to raise their heads. The tens of thousands of followers were washed away by the rain as soon as their blood flowed out of their wounds. They were cold and their lips were blue, but no one dared to avoid it. Thunder and rain were all blessings of God. If there was a center of this terrible storm, then Ning Ke was standing there. He sensed the most powerful Haotian's divine power and paid the heaviest price. Dozens of divine talismans had already dissipated. The most terrifying thing was that the Haotian's divine power in his body was disappearing faster and faster under the washing of the storm. Rainwater continuously dripped down his pale face. Feeling the divine power in his body disappearing, he was so cold that he couldn't stop shivering. He looked extremely weak, as though he could collapse at any moment. But no matter how fierce the storm was, he did not fall, nor did he kneel. He looked at the Peach Mountain silently in the wind and rain, squinting his eyes through the wind and rain, looking for her who should be there. Thousands of miles away from Peach Mountain, over the boundless sea of the Kingdom of Song, the strong wind rolled up the dark clouds. Between the dark clouds and the sea, the petrel flew proudly like black lightning. Let the storm be more violent. In the front yard of Peach Mountain, tens of thousands of people knelt on the ground in fear. They looked so small in the dark. Only Ning Ke stood there. Even though he looked so lonely, he looked so tall. He was not a brave and arrogant petrel. He never cared about dignity in order to survive. Even though he had knelt before, he didn't want to kneel now. He had already re-established a connection with her. Since you are my natal, then you are my Sang-Sang. You are my wife. We can raise our eyebrows, but how can we kneel down to you? Kill me if you can. F***CK. Today's reign was different from the one after the headmaster left the human world. Since it represented the anger of Haotian, it was certainly much more violent. This rain was not as heavy as the one after the headmaster left the human world. But at least it lasted much longer than the common rainstorms in summer. The downpour lasted for half a day before it gradually lightened. The fine drizzle finally felt like a pitter-patter, and the wind in the front yard also became much gentler, bringing with it a sense of wetness that made people feel extremely comfortable. Tens of thousands of followers woke up and found that the storm was no longer raging. Peach Mountain had finally regained its tranquility. Many people had fainted because of the storm, and some had even stopped breathing. Their soaked clothes sent a piercing chill to their bones. They were still frightened and did not dare to speak. The powerful cultivators were even more miserable. The storm was so terrible that it was even more cleansed than the chi of heaven and earth in the mountains. The stronger their senses were, the more their psyche power was damaged. Ning-Ke was the most miserable one. At this moment, the Haotian's divine power in his body had disappeared. The psyche power in his sense of perception was severely damaged. His black hair was dripping down his shoulders. His pale face was haggard and his eyes were no longer bright. They were so dim that it seemed like they were about to lose all their luster. The storm stopped and the sky became clear again. Suddenly, a rainbow appeared from the divine hall of light on the peak of Peach Mountain and fell into the distance. Judging from the direction, the rainbow should land somewhere in the South Jin Kingdom. Looking at this beautiful scene, people on the front yard of Peach Mountain seemed to have forgotten the cold on their bodies. Their feet were still soaked in the cold rain. Recalling the power of heaven and earth, they were filled with awe and worship again. It was already dusk. The shadow of the dark night could be vaguely seen in the lower part of the sky. Some people looked away from the disappearing rainbow and looked at Ning-Ke in front of the altar. The storm that lasted for half a day had washed away the anger and dust in the world. It had washed away the Haotian's divine power in Ning-Ke's body and the divine talisman. But it could not wash away the past. The hierarch looked at Ning-Ke and slowly raised his right hand. He gave the order to attack. No one could understand why Ning-Ke did not take the chance to escape when the storm stopped. He had no more Haotian's divine power in his body. What else could he do other than escape? Ning-Ke looked at the people around him, including Qin Yan, the national master of the Golden Tribe, and Zhao Nanhai. He put the iron bow on his shoulder and tightened his grip on the handle of the iron cutlass. Previously, because of the Grand Tianqi, he was invincible in the human world with the help of Haotian's divine power. These people were no match for him at all. However, the situation had taken a decisive turn now. Under the siege of these experts, he could not even hold on for a few breaths. If he drew his bow and waited to shoot, he might be able to intimidate these people. At least he could try to open a path for himself. But the problem was that he did not have enough iron arrows. Most importantly, he had never thought of opening a path to escape. He had never thought of leaving Peach Mountain. Looking at the powerful enemies around him, Ning-Ke did not show any fear. He looked at Crown Prince Chongming and the other monarchs of the smaller countries and said, "I will not kill you today, not because of the rule that cultivators should not kill ordinary people, but because I think you deserve to die in the hands of the Tang soldiers." No one could understand why he could be so calm and confident in such a desperate situation. What was he thinking? The hierarch shouted, "Do you think you can escape from Peach Mountain?" Ning-Ke looked at the horrible wound on his shoulder and said sarcastically, "At least you can't stop me." The hierarch calmed down and said coldly, "In front of you is a dead end." Ning-Ke said, "No way out is a dead end." The hierarch asked, "Where is your way out?" At this time, the national master of the Golden Tribe and the others had blocked all the paths in the front yard. No matter who they were, Ning-Ke would not be able to defeat them under normal circumstances. Logically speaking, he had no way out, so there was no way out. But everyone, including the hierarch, had forgotten that he only needed to step back to set foot on a path. The path to Peach Mountain. Haotian was on Peach Mountain. The hierarch and everyone else thought that Ning-Ke would not choose to go up the mountain, because it would be suicidal. But he made a choice that surprised everyone. He turned around and ran up Peach Mountain. It happened so suddenly that the West Hill Divine Palace's reaction was a little slow. The hierarch roared and countless sharp flying swords broke through the air and shot toward Ning-Ke on the stone steps. The national master of the Golden Tribe raised the cracked wooden tripod in his hand. Zhao Nanhai's palm shone brightly. Qin Yen sat cross-legged in the rain and chanted a Buddhist hymn. A handprint appeared in the air and then fell down. Ning Ke knew that he could not stop it. Even if Third Sister were here, facing the sword array of the divine halls of Westhill and the joint attack of the three peerless powerhouses, she could only choose to retreat. So he did not turn around to resist, nor did he choose to dodge. He stepped on the stone steps and increased his speed to a terrifying level. He continued to rush toward the peak. A series of muffled explosions rang out. The psyche power of the national master of the Golden Tribe kept bombarding his sense of perception. Haotian's divine flame in Zhao Nanhai's palm hit his back. Qin Yen's Akalanatha seal landed heavily on his body. Dozens of flying swords cut his clothes into pieces. Ning Ke spat out a mouthful of blood. His face turned even paler and he almost fell on the stone step. If it were not for the fact that his great spirit was almost at the highest level and his body was almost unbelievably strong, the first wave of attack would have crushed him into pieces. Even if he survived, he would still be seriously injured. Ning Ke used his strong willpower to restrain his sense of perception, which had almost dissipated because of the pain. He stomped heavily on the ground with his right foot, breaking several stone steps, and turned into a shadow as he continued to move forward. Not only did he not fall, he even sped up. In just a few breaths, he had already broken hundreds of stone steps and was far away from the attack range of the powerhouses in the front yard of Peach Mountain. He became a faint shadow on the mountain path. When the divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of Westhill, Zhao Nanhai and the others were about to continue their pursuit, the hierarch suddenly reached out his hand with a complicated expression and signaled for them to stop. Because of the right to light, everyone from the divine halls of Westhill was gathered around the altar in the front yard. At this moment, there was no one on Peach Mountain. Except for the sound of flowing water beside the stone steps, it was eerily quiet. The silence was suddenly broken by the sound of footsteps. Ning Ke turned into a shadow on the stone steps and ran toward the peak at an unimaginable speed, leaving behind a trail of blood and broken stone steps. In that moment, he had been seriously injured. His sense of perception was shaken, and every step he took brought more pain. His ribs were cracked by Qin Yen's giant handprint, and the cracks seemed to deepen with every step he took. No one knew when his ribs would break. If only the big black umbrella was here. Who could hurt him then? Ning Ke suddenly felt a lot of nostalgia. Thinking that he would see the big black umbrella soon, he became happy again. There was no one on the quiet Peach Mountain. No one was chasing him down the stone step. He kept running alone. He did not feel lonely or nervous. He was going to see her. How could he feel lonely and nervous? The more he ran, the happier he was. Even the cold autumn wind after the rain could not cut off his smile. The two arrays of clear light were torn apart by his iron cutlass and divine talisman. He came to the foot of the divine hall and stood on the cliff yard. The autumn sky was so clean after the rain. The view from the top of the mountain was even wider. He could see the sun setting in the west and even the yellow river flowing into the sea in the extreme south. Then he looked at the divine hall and the straight stone steps on the peak. He thought to himself, "If I go up, will you still hide 1,000 miles away? It took me so long to write this chapter. It seems that I have reached an incredible state where I don't know whether I will live or die." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 899. The air was clear after the rain. Even though it was late at night, people could still see far away. Tens of thousands of believers on the front yard of Peach Mountain looked at the figure on the mountain path with mixed feelings. This scene was very similar to the scene when Ning Ke climbed the back mountain of the academy many years ago. The dark night sky was like a piece of ink paper, suspended on the flat ground. There were dozens of peaks in it, giving people a feeling that if it were not for these peaks, the night sky would fall on the earth. The night sky above the divine halls of Westhill was a bit special today. The sky was full of stars, but there was no trace of the moon. The silver starlight sprinkled on the foothills, changing the color of Peach Mountain. Ning Kei's eyes crossed the silver mountain path and fell on the divine hall of light. Then he began to tidy up his wet clothes, tied up his wet hair, put away his bow and knife, and wiped the rain off his face. He moved very slowly and looked very serious. He didn't go up the stairs until he was sure that there was nothing wrong with his clothes and manners. Since he was here to keep the appointment, he naturally had to show respect. It was already deep into the night. The thin crescent moon was hidden behind the dark clouds and was completely untraceable. The numerous stars on the dark curtain of the night seemed very bright. There were 7 brightest stars in the night sky, known as guiding stars. They were the most reliable guiding lights for fishermen sailing on the sea. They were so bright that it made people dizzy. There were 700 stone steps between the cliff yard and the divine hall of light on the peak. Ning Kei seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, he walked hundreds of steps with each step, as if he was riding the wind. As soon as his foot left the cliff plateau and landed on the first foothold, he took a step forward. Among the 7 bright guiding stars in the night sky, the northernmost star, Li Tian's star, suddenly dimmed. Ning Kei continued to take the second step, and the second of the 7 guiding stars also dimmed. With every step he took, one of the 7 guiding stars in the night sky dimmed, as if the everlasting starlight was absorbed into his body by his footsteps. Not all of the tens of thousands of people on the front plain could see him walking on the mountain path, but all of them saw the 7 guiding stars in the night sky dim one after another. Shocked shouts and terrified prayers suddenly rang out. The hierarch and the others looked at the strange changes of the stars, and their expressions became even more solemn. The sky was full of stars. There were several divine halls on Peach Mountain, but there was only one in Ning Kei's eyes. The building material of the divine hall of light was very unusual. It was not gold, jade, or stone, but it was naturally precious. Now that it was covered by the starlight, it looked even more sacred. Standing in front of the divine hall of light, Ning Kei looked like an inconspicuous ant. He looked at the divine hall in front of him and fell silent. Extremely complicated emotions welled up in his heart. There was some fear, some excitement, some yearning, but he also wanted to escape. He had risked his life to leave Chang'an, come to the West Hill Divine Kingdom, and sneak into the Peach Mountain just to come to the Divine Hall of Light and see her. He had been calm throughout the entire process. However, when he was about to meet her in the Divine Hall of Light, he could no longer control his emotions. No matter how hard he tried to convince himself that she was Sang Sang in the Divine Hall, that she was the dark and skinny girl he raised, and that blood was thicker than water, she was in fact Haotian. There was a saying called the difference between heaven and earth, which was used to describe the distance between two people. There was also a saying called the distance between heaven and man, which was used to describe the fact that they could never touch each other. He was a mortal, and she was Haotian. The distance between them was like the distance between heaven and earth. They were separated by a high wall that connected heaven and earth. The distance between heaven and earth was, in fact, eternal. Ning Kei's emotions had never been so complicated, and he had never been so afraid. If he wanted to find a similar experience in his past life, it was actually related to her. That time, Sang Sang ran away from home. He sat in the old brush pen shop and waited silently. Then, he searched everywhere in Chang'an. He stayed silent in the scholar's mansion and cursed the heavens and earth by the Yanming Lake. It seemed that nothing had changed. She still ran away from home, and he still had to find her and bring her home. He was worried that he could not bring her home, so he was afraid. Ning Kei suddenly became extremely angry. He did not know if it was because of fear or because she was disobedient like last time. His voice trembled with anger. Is it fun to run away from home? He looked at the quiet depths of the divine hall of light and said, I thought you were young and insensible the first time. What about now? You are already over 20 years old, and you are still insensible? Do you know how dirty the old brush pen shop is now? The dust on the table is more than the dust in the stove. Shouldn't you be doing all these things? What are you doing? You are married, so you should wash the dishes, sweep the floor, and wipe the table. But you can't stop and want to play everywhere. You are not home all day. How can there be so many fun things? Look at this shabby divine hall. It is as cold as a stone tomb. It is not as lively as Lin 47th Street. I don't believe that the Chinjinji cosmetics store here is better than the one in Chang'an. There was no sound from the divine hall of light. Ning Ke became more and more annoyed and said, Say something. Say something. Why don't you dare to speak? Are you feeling guilty? Have you really made up your mind to separate from me? Give me the arrows and the horse carriage, and leave the black umbrella and that silly thing. You have clearly divided the property, but have you asked for my permission? Okay, let's not talk about whether I have agreed or not. Let's talk about the separation. Since we are going to separate, we should do it thoroughly. I buried half of the banknotes in the old brush pen shop in your grave. I filled in the title deed of the Yenming Lake Manor with your name. I gave the shares of the gambling house to the Scholar Mansion. His mood suddenly became a little gloomy, and he said in a low voice, Actually, I never thought of separating from you. The disposal of the property was counted as an inheritance. Since you are still alive, the disposal is naturally invalid. How about you return the things you took, and we will pretend that nothing happened. There was still no sound from the divine hall of light. Give me back Dahe, give me back the big black umbrella, and give yourself back to me. Ning Ke said, I believe that even if you have forgotten many things, at least you have not forgotten these things. Otherwise, you would not have asked the drunkard to send the arrows and the horse carriage to Chang'an. The divine hall was still quiet and no one answered. Now I finally understand why you want the West Hill Divine Palace to hold this right to light. It is because you want to kill Pippi, but you can't. Because I told you that we owe our lives to him. Ning Ke suddenly became calm and walked into the divine hall. He said, Even without this Tianqi, the relationship between us has always been there. You have blocked my perception, but it still exists. Just like your face is still black even if you put 3 layers of powder on it. Because it is born, it is destined. The quiet divine hall of light echoed with the sound of his footsteps and his calm and firm voice. You are Haotian and also Yama. So the relationship between us is something that you have decided. Since that is the case, how can you unilaterally cut us off? I really can't take it anymore. 2,000 today, 1,000 short. I will make it up within this month, including the 3,000 chapters that I didn't update on the 5th of the month. In the next few days, I will probably gather the rest of the holidays together and report to you tomorrow. I can't take it anymore. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 900. I said yesterday that I was going to take a vacation. The original plan was to write another chapter today and take a Saturday off tomorrow. Then I would take the next 3 weekends, including the one on Children's Day. That would be a total of 4 days. So I squinted my eyes and tried to continue writing the story. Then I found that I had written a pile of sh*t. Just when I felt that I had written a pile of sh*t, I finally saw Songhai's review in the book review section. I read it carefully and kept silent for a long time. Because his praise made me confused, I gave up on that pile of sh*t. I decided to take a break from now on. I didn't care about the reason, I just wanted to have a good rest for a few days. I had to clarify the main topic first. Otherwise, I would end up in such a situation. I wrote a lot of sh*t because I was lazy and didn't want to write. Yes, I will take 7 days off. I will go back to Hubei. I won't do anything. I just want to use these 7 days to have a good time. I don't want to think about anything else. Before you get upset, let me add a few words. After 7 days, Jiang Yi will no longer take a weekend off. In fact, it is a vacation. If you are willing to continue reading, there are more because I want to talk to you. I talked to Yunkai the day before yesterday. He and I both gave Jiang Yi a similar score. I gave it 7.8, which ranked second among all the stories I had written. We both thought it was good. However, I wasn't satisfied. This was because I had written more than an 8 out of 10. The main reason I gave Jiang Yi 7.8 out of 10 was because I hadn't finished the book yet. There was still 1.5 volumes of content and several 100,000 words. If I could write better in the later chapters, I was confident that I could get more than an 8 out of 10. I was ambitious about Jiang Yi. I reported to everyone when I started writing the book 2 years ago that I wanted this book to be good. The result was good, which proved that my writing was good. But ambition was like weeds. It was hidden, but it didn't mean it didn't exist. Besides writing good, I also wanted to write well. Just like what Songhai said in the book review, the Academy said that life should be meaningful, which in fact means that I said that books should be well written. If there is some meaningful material, then it is the so-called good writing. My problem now is that I am in a very confused stage. Not to mention the latter, it has become very difficult to achieve the former, and I am seriously lacking in confidence. As for why I have this feeling, it has nothing to do with anything else. It is purely because I am a little tired from writing, and my ability to conceive the plot has been severely tested. This was truly a painful matter. Cloud knew that I had been living a chaotic life over the past few days, and that I was incredibly worried. Some of my friends would think that this was nothing more than my latest excuse for slacking off and taking time off. I deserved to be teased or scolded. Alright then, I was probably one of those legendary bitches who couldn't sleep and would sit in front of the computer. Actually, I was still playing games and procrastinating. I wasn't writing because I couldn't write, and I wasn't thinking because I couldn't think of anything. Why was it that what was written and then deleted was bullshit? Because I haven't slept for more than 30 hours. Why haven't I slept? Because they were playing. Why were they playing? Because he couldn't sleep. Why couldn't he sleep? Because he would start thinking of plots while lying on the bed. Just like what I told everyone a few days ago, I still couldn't think of any good plots. As a professional writer, of course, I had to have basic professional ethics. Compared to other writers, I was already lazy enough and wrote slowly enough. I even had to take a day off every week. It seemed like it should be easy, but in reality, thinking about plots continuously for a long period of time had accumulated to the point that it was annoying and tiring. Other things could be solved easily, but if I couldn't think of a good enough plot, there was really no solution to this, because it was a problem with my brain. I asked Lin Hai and my other friends for advice. They said that it was because I had too high expectations for myself. I was very gratified when I heard that. I thought to myself that I still had my literary pretentiousness, but I also felt very embarrassed. Because we were all my closest friends, of course I had to say nice things. But if I put it in another way, it might not sound so nice. Maybe it was just like what some of my friends said, that I had a problem with my brain. I had been writing for so many years, but I had always been scolded and ridiculed for having a hipster disease. I had said before that if hipsterism was really a disease, I wouldn't treat it anyway. After all these years of writing, I had been quite popular, hadn't I? But it was really tiring. I had said before that updating was tiring and writing was tiring. In fact, when I looked back at all these years, I had to say without fear of being scolded that thinking about the plots of these novels was the most tiring thing. Perhaps it was as I had said many times in interviews in the past. I didn't need inspiration, but I really needed a good mental state. My mental state was really bad for the past 10 days. Now that I thought about it, if we were talking about the mental state of writing plots, it was still during Suzaku. Was it because I was single at that time? Was it because I didn't have anything to worry about? Or was it because when he couldn't write anything back then, he just stopped writing? He didn't have to do what he was doing now, desperately struggling to write a satisfactory chapter, but accumulating the pressure until the next day, until he couldn't bear it anymore. I remembered the first time I went to the Northeast to meet the leader in September that year. I immediately applied for a month's leave. I didn't feel any psychological pressure when I applied, and the readers happily wished me a safe journey. Of course, the situation now was definitely different from back then. Professional writers had to be able to withstand this kind of pressure. The readers spent money to read, tipped, and voted, so why shouldn't I work hard? But there were really many kinds of hard work. My current terrible mental state was really the result of hard work. I had to think of a way to change it. I had to make hard work produce results. Only then would I be able to write well for the next 20 years. Only then would I be able to continue writing for you for the next 20 years. Starting from the year of Chinyu, in these 6 years, I've applied for all kinds of leave, sick leave, personal leave, annual leave that I couldn't write out, but I've never applied for leave without a reason. I really couldn't find a reason for this 7 days of leave. I just needed a period of time to relax, or even to party. If I can't drink beer, then I'll drink less white wine. Taking a break doesn't always have a good result. It might even make the author lazier, or even collapse. But I'm not worried about this, and you don't need to worry either. Because the purpose of my rest is to write this story above an 8 out of 10. I want all the stories I write in the future to be above an 8 out of 10. I can definitely do it. To achieve this is indeed a difficult task. But I have confidence because I know that deep down I'm a ruthless person. I'm a ruthless person to myself. More than 10 years ago, in Chengdu, I went to the stadium with my university classmates to buy tickets for a football match. I wanted to resell the tickets to make some money. At that time, it was really overcrowded. We lined up for an entire night, and in the wee hours of the morning, the line was broken. The iron railings were knocked down, and some people fell to the ground bleeding. Some people were squeezed until their intestines were cut into pieces. In the end, all the classmates around me were squeezed out, and only I stood at the very end with a dull expression. I bought the tickets, and in the end, I earned $4. This was a famous joke in our university, and it was also a good joke that has continuously provided me with moral support. I know to what extent I can do it. I wrote 2,500 words for this leave of absence. I said this not to express my sincerity, but to say that with my current mental state, I'm afraid that I won't be able to write good content. But if I don't care about the quality, it really isn't difficult to write a 3,000-word chapter of Approaching Night. Of course, this explanation might not have any meaning. My friends who want to scold me will still scold me. But for those of you who have been supporting and tolerating me all these years, I want to explain it to you. I once wrote this sentence in one of my monthly votes. You can choose not to vote, but I can't not vote. What I said was powerful and resonant, and it caused countless echoes in the pugilistic world. In fact, this chapter has the same meaning. Perhaps you don't want to hear my reason, but I have to seriously report it to you. No matter what, I thank everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 901. Ning Ke walked to the depths of the divine hall and saw the figure on the balcony. He was a little shocked because the figure was very tall, even taller than an ordinary man. The woman on the balcony was very fat, beyond the range of plump, and could only be described as fat. She was wearing a very thin, flowery green dress. The autumn wind blew gently at the bottom of the cliff, but it didn't move at all. This was because the fabric of the dress was extremely tight against her plump body, tightly sticking to her body, and the lines of her dress were exaggerated. Ning Ke had imagined the scene of reuniting with Sang Sang many times, but he never expected that when they met again, the dark and thin girl had disappeared, and the tall and fat woman appeared in front of him. He remembered the horse carriage he saw when he bought sweet potatoes in the small town, and the tall and fat girl in the horse carriage. He remembered that he had once said that she was like a fat pig, and then he realized that they had already met. At that time, he did not know her, but she must have known everything. Thinking of this, he felt that his confidence was gradually dissipating, and the Academy's plan seemed to be becoming ridiculous. He looked at her back and was silent for a long time. This woman did not look like Sang Sang at all. She was a completely different person from the Sang Sang in his memories, but he knew that she was Sang Sang. It was not because of that mysterious feeling, but because of his certain perception. The barrier between them had disappeared, so he naturally knew that she was Sang Sang. The woman on the balcony was obviously Sang Sang, but she did not look like Sang Sang. She was not the thin and dark Sang Sang, but the white and fat Sang Sang. Ning Ke suddenly felt sad, because he knew that he would probably never see the thin and dark Sang Sang again. Sang Sang stood on the balcony, looking at the autumn night from the precipice, with her hands behind her back. Her green sleeves were like the sea, and her figure was tall and straight like a peak. But he felt so lonely. "Come home with me." Ning Ke looked at her back and said in a very natural tone, not as excited as before outside the divine hall. He was like a man who saw his playful little wife by the lake. Sang Sang did not turn around. She still kept her hands behind her back and said nothing. The starlight from the night sky shone on the balcony, sprinkled on her broad shoulders, and then spread like ink. It was quiet in the divine hall. The night wind blew in from the terrace, bypassing the broken 10,000-year-old lamp and lifting an old cloth, revealing a golden brick and a big black umbrella. Looking at that place, Ning Ke walked to the balcony after a moment of silence. He came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder, as if to brush the starlight away from her. The night breeze was gentle. His fingertips fell on her shoulders and then fell again. The tip of his finger had been sliced off. Blood gradually flowed out and condensed into an extremely neat circle. It looked like a dark red, as beautiful as a cinnabar mole on a beauty's body. There were countless lines invisible to the naked eye on the balcony, dividing the space into two completely different worlds, Sang Sang's world and the human world. Sang Sang's world was composed of the most basic laws, including the laws of space. As long as she didn't allow it, no one could enter her world. Her world and the human world were extremely far apart. Even if she came to the human world, it was still the same. She was clearly standing in front of Ning Ke, but it seemed that she was far away. Ning Ke stood so close to her, but they were so far apart. Looking at the dark red blood at the tip of his finger, Ning Ke was silent for a long time. Then he smiled lightly and sarcastically. He said, "We are indeed worlds apart." He raised his head to look at her tall back, at her plump waist and buttocks, and said, "You've gotten fatter and taller. You've changed. I think you've forgotten a lot of things." Sang Sang still did not speak or turn around. She held her hands behind her back and looked at the mountains under the night sky. "I can't forget those things. That year in Hebei province, starving people killed each other, and their parents traded their children for food. Although I survived, I had already become one of them. If I hadn't dug you out from the pile of corpses, I don't know how I would have lived alone. So not only did I save you, in a sense, you also saved me. You allowed me to live more like a human. You allowed me to find a bright reason to live when I committed all kinds of crimes in Min Mountain and the wilderness. Yes, for me at that time, you were the only light on my back. You were even the only reason for me to live in this world." Looking at her back and her hands behind her back, Ning Ke suddenly wanted to hold her hands. Just like many years ago, when she was scared by the wolves in Min Mountain and cried, he held her in his arms, held her hands tightly, and told her stories all night long. Now her hands were not so small, but he still wanted to hold them. This desire was so strong that his voice trembled slightly. I don't know if you have ever thought about what the meaning of life is. You are an eternal and objective existence, while human beings are just passers-by on the journey of time. Our lives are very short and will inevitably end one day. It is easy to fall into the path of nothingness. In the end, the reason that can make us resolutely go through every day is nothing more than something that appears to be more powerful in the spirit, such as emotions. If you carefully analyze these things, you will often find that all of these things are based on memories. The more memories you have, the stronger and longer the emotions you have. I don't want to recall those things with you now. But you know very well that we have memories that neither of us can compare. So you can't leave me, and I can't leave you. As I have said before, you are my natal, and you are my life. So I came to find you, and I want to take you away. After saying this, he reached out to her shoulder again, wanting to brush away the lonely starlight, wanting to pull her back from that lonely world, back to the human world, back to his side. There were countless crisp, cracking sounds on the balcony, and his sleeves were instantly torn into countless pieces. The pure Great Spirit covering his arm only lasted for a very short time before it was cut into pieces by the lines in the space. Countless fine lines of blood appeared on his arm, and it looked like it was about to be cut off. Suddenly, the space rules that divided the world into two sides disappeared, and the horrible blood lines on his arm did not continue to go deeper. Because Sang Sang opened her own world. Sang Sang slowly turned around and looked at him quietly. There was no emotion in her eyes, only calmness. Ning Ke had not yet recovered from the shock of her opening her world. Looking at her eyes, he became more and more shocked and speechless, because he had never seen her look like this. Sang Sang reached out and held his frozen hand in front of him. He felt that her hand was very soft and very warm, just like the lake water, which could contain everything. No, it was not a hand, but a gentle universe, which made him a little fascinated. She was his natal, so she could feel what he was thinking, and when they held hands, he could also see her consciousness and her thoughts. Haotian's consciousness was so vast as the sea of stars, that ordinary people could not bear. Even if Sang Sang tried to control it at this time, Ning Ke's sense of perception still set off shocking waves. Blood began to ooze from the corners of his eyes, but his eyes were still bright, because he saw many memories, many of her memories, in the stormy waves. He saw the mulberry trees stripped of their bark in Hebei province, the bleating lambs in Min Mountain, the roast chicken and wine in the city of Wei, the old brush pen shop in Chang'an, the cosmetics in Chenjinji Cosmetics Store, the summer rain and the notes under the bed, and the night by the snow sea. It turned out that she did not forget anything. She remembered all these things, even more clearly than he did. Suddenly, Ning Ke's eyes were no longer bright, but a little dim. Then he began to get angry because he understood a cold fact. She was Haotian, and the scenes in these memories were originally arranged by her. These memories were just derivatives of her asking the headmaster to ascend to heaven. She and the headmaster had known each other for thousands of years, and neither of them could do anything to the other. She used heaven's calculation to construct a natural situation, descended to the human world, and finally succeeded in forcing the headmaster to ascend to heaven. The memories between her and Ning Ke were part of this heaven's calculation, but they were neither the cause nor the goal. It could even be said that they were just means. Ning Ke stared at her eyes, at the eternal calmness that did not belong to human beings, and slowly clenched his left fist. Because of his strength, the blood lines on his right arm burst open again. In fact, he had always understood that the memories he cherished were just her calculations. The two most crucial points of the headmaster's departure from the human world were naturally to accept him as a disciple, and Sang Sang being exposed as the daughter of Yama. He carried Sang Sang on his back and fled all over the world. Everything was just heaven's calculation, but he did not want to think about these things, because he was not reconciled to it. He always felt that she was still Sang Sang, until this moment, when they held hands and their minds were connected. Everything was exposed, so he felt very painful. Everything is heaven's calculation, so the memories are naturally fake. Ning Ke thought silently, and then he understood everything in his consciousness. Those memories could be real, because Sang Sang had not yet woken up at that time, and she was still his Sang Sang. But when Sang Sang woke up, those memories became means. I did not calculate everything because you are not from this world, so I stayed in the human world. The connection between us can never be cut off. Sang Sang said, so you have to surrender to me. Ning Ke had never hidden anything from her, including his biggest secret. Last year, when he was wandering on the sea with the headmaster, he did not hide their conversation from her. She knew that he was not from the Hautian world, so she decided to show her generosity and kindness. Ning Ke stared into her eyes and asked, I am not your people, why should I surrender to you? Sang Sang said, I will grant you eternity. Ning Ke asked, what is eternity? Can it be eaten? Or can it make my bed and quilt? I am back. I only went online once in 7 days, and I found that it feels good and my mind is much clearer. If you want to contact me, you can call me, email me, or leave a message. Wait for me to reply when I get home. 7 days seems long, but in fact it is very short. Something happened, and I cursed my mother on Weibo. In addition, Yun Kai will not care about the book review section for the time being. In fact, she told me many days ago that it is really hard, and I sincerely thank you for your hard work. The other managers have also worked hard. Once again, thank you for your tolerance. I am not a professional author, but you are the best readers, I am sure of that. Because I will be in Hubei this month, I have to go out, so I try my best to write this paragraph well. I dare not say how much, but I will write more when I get home in June. Thank you again, sincerely. In addition, I like the last sentence of this chapter very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.